it's a great pleasure for me to welcome right next to me Professor Robert Boyer, who is really our if you want, our inspiration, but also our great theoretical thinker behind what we are trying to do here. Professor Boyer used to be a senior researcher at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique and professor at the École des Hautes Études et Sciences Sociales. He is now a fellow at the Institut des Amériques in Paris. The context of, well, why he in part he is participating, first he's interested in the topic, but also because we are looking at, if you want, an application to some of his theories, and his main contribution to the theoretical field has been the regulation theory, for which Professor Boyer is very well known, and he has written extensively on it. I'm not going to refer to all of the books because it would take me the rest of the afternoon, but I do want to say a few of the books on the regulation theory, the state of the art in 2001, and the future of economic growth as new becomes old. And most recently, Le capitalisme à ses épreuves de la pandémie, which I find a very intriguing title. And Une discipline sans réflexivité peut-elle être une séance épistémologie de l'économie. I'm not sure how positive you are on economists such as myself, but I leave.
I don't give the answer, but if you read carefully, it is totally evident. But there is nowhere where I say that the reader has to conclude. And the evidence is terrific.
But for today, you will provide us with a theoretical framework in which we can think about Chinese investments in Southeast Asia. Professor Boyer, thank you so much for joining us. And the floor is yours, and I will move out of the screen. Okay. I will put your PowerPoint up.
Okay, thank you so much for your invitation and your kind presentation. I can only disappoint you. Okay, so, but it is very important for me to get in touch with contemporary research. So regulation is a theory in order to try to understand what are the current events implying for the future. So we are a sense of history. Therefore, the title is the following: Sectoral and Geographical Diversity of Chinese FDI and its Evolution. So you see 2 points of theory. It is an historical theory and diversity. So, and we will combine these 2 elements. What impressed me, if you have a firm and you train a wonderful neoclassical economist, and then it will say, oh, it is only price optimization. So we don't need any other theory. But when the question is, how do you have such shifts in FDI direction sectors all across the world? You go back in the 50s, was US investing in Europe, and so well, if the world is stable, what do you have such changes? It is the basic question of regulation. And the second mechanism is that people imagine that anybody has the same economy. So American economists think that we will all become Americans. The probability is 0 by definition, by the dollar. So the other fact is, the more global the economy, the more diverse of the economy. So we have a totally contradictory with one best measure. And then I will try to develop the thing. First, conventional theorizing is at bay. I will not speak of the crisis of macro, but I would not like to be the chair of the Fed, because you have deciding, you have to decide without any theory. So you decide and you will see what happens. So radical uncertainty. So I think the non-classical theory is out. Econometric studies are out because the regularity of the past do not imply the regularity of today. And therefore, so for me, I was trained in non-classical economy. I was even a mathematical economist. So I have nothing against. I'm very fond of, but I could not explain anything by this theory. So I tried to invent another way of doing economy. Second solution. You have markets, but markets are hidden with institution, organization, and the market do the interplay between them. But they are not the founding ones. They are organizing the interaction of entities organization and institutions. And second, they are not fixed. By definition, you have a market is changing the organization is the market. So you have a never-ending history. For example, I never got the idea of enographical model, you compute, and then you have the optimality, and the story stops. Ah, wonderful. Then you can go on. You don't need economists because you have the equilibrium, and you go on. Supply of economy is zero. Nice. How many thousand economies do we have in the US? And then you need to immerse economic rising in history. It is my second favorite. I had the chance to have a very good history professor in the secondary school, and he convinced me that you have to capture content in order to understand history. It was very, I don't know any date, data, but thinking about social process. I was trained since I was very young, so and still I'm continuing this kind of exercise. So the importance of secondary teaching. Had not been this professor, I should not be what I am. So I'm totally impressed by the impact, the quality of the teaching on the generation of new way to see. And last on it, I will apply this to China. First element, imagine you are in Singapore, you are in the previous century is 65, and I apply external inferring. I don't know what will be the specialization, but look, the specialization today, something happened, no? Because technologies and preferences are not given. And insert this in your classical way, just call it the theory collapse, because you have innovation, increasing content, and you have endogenous formation of, when I was baby, I never asked for buying this computer. So you understand that preferences are endogenous by definition. Second, static competitive advantage in an evolving world. It's a silly thing. Let's go to Korea. I should have specialized in agricultural products. You know that Korea is a wonderful example of institutional driven capturing of modernity. So you understand that static comparison, and reverse, I'm studying Latin America. When I study Argentina, I think historical time is immobile, because by definition, you don't have this. And then the relative price and exchange rate are the only adjustment mechanism. And as I will try to define this, you have organization, regulation, and then price adjustment do matter. But they matter in a given complex environment. So you don't have technology preference and in between the price, but you have organization, innovation, state, and then you have the price system. And you understand that. So in lexicography order, you have first organization and then the coordination by price. You stop my, okay.
Yeah, you're right. It's right. That's right.
Okay. Countries are price taker. Imagine it is totally silly. By definition, you have the GAFAM are not price takers. So, and by definition, the formation of price is a struggle. You don't have a fixed price, an equilibrium price. If you go to business school, you learn how to become price taker. Can you remove the okay, and so size matter, and it will be, if you are in Singapore or in US, you cannot have the same macro, the same policy. Size matter, and if you are in between medium-sized economy, you are facing a lot of problems. So you have to embed all this here, and I will propose a very simple analysis, regulation. Okay. Okay. Then let me, and if you are looking carefully, imagine this is the revealed competitive advantage of various countries in the end of the previous century. So what you have the following. First, you have comparative from the industry below to the service, and material natural resources on one side, manufactured goods. And as you see, you have by definition, all economies do interact. So, for example, Asia is specialized in manufacturing, where you have Latin America. So you introduce the basic phenomenon that FDI will try to reallocate factors given the deepening of speciality. This is, in my sense, very important to understand. And if I follow this, I would simply apply natural resources allocation and so on, the conventional record. But what I need to do is now to introduce what are the binding institutions. And with my Japanese friend, we do a systematic study of diversity of capital. Imagine you are collecting data on labor relation, nature of competition, role of the state, integration into the world economy, financial regime. And then you are plugging all this and you try to have cluster analysis. And what is very, very interesting, and it is, you know, on one vertical side, in the term of labor side, you have countries with intensive labor laws, and you have countries, look, Singapore and Hong Kong, will play on education. On the right hand side, you have people playing industry, people playing natural resources. And as you might see, you have a huge discrepancy. For example, you have the specificity or small city capitalism, which are very, very distinctive. You have a wonderful model of social democratic countries. And what is very interesting, Asia has been adding at least 3 models to the composition of models in the previous work. We have been finding with my friend Bruno Amab 5 capitals. So what is very interesting, Asia has to be related in a variety of capitals, which create institutionally build competitive advantage. It was a theme of OECD. You said you build competitive advantage. Remember, it was the time of the success of studying the success of Korea, the success of Japan, even the success of France. Paradoxically, on the time, France has been a miracle back in the golden age. So how was it made? And it was to be attributed to the state intervention. So clearly, you see different competitive advantage. Second element, what is very, very important, and I want to relate to our previous discussion this morning. Sorry for the people. My vision of world economy is that you have a huge contradiction between what is implied by economic specialization and the geopolitical location of one country. Let's take, I'm fond of Japan, so I study very much Japan. Japanese absolutely the protection of the US. They are the good cupids. But you remember back in the 80s, they were fighting because they created, and all the policy of Japan is isolating between dependency, geopolitical, and competition at the time. Let me take the example, China and United States. Before the present period, I'm subtracting the present generation, you are the de facto, the American firms are very pleased to delocate, to have low price for sustaining consumption, and the central bank has such reserve in order to buy treasury bonds. From the economic point of view, it's silent complementarity. But you look at the Senate, they are the enemies because you have rivalry as a geopolitical power. And let me apply this to the case of Europe. Germany decided to align with Russia. In a sense, we will form a bloc. The product that, and at the time of Merkel, she's very bright. They had forgotten the geopolitical issue. If Putin is cut, the economic strategy is failing. And I think it is the major theme I will develop today. We are at the eve of a dramatic reordering. Economic rationale will be overcome during some time by geopolitical survive to the fragmentation of the world economy. And this is very important. So, and I could develop China, European Union, and so on. For example, I will not develop. And this framework seems to me it is very old. It was a decade old, but it still says something very important. We should not miss the word. This word is highly specific. And the reversal with Trump and now followed by Biden, you have systemic rivalry with China and US. They are ready to compromise economic results in order to get political results. So clearly, we have a drastic change, and these are dramatic consequences for economic. Oh yes, sanctions against Russia. We are hurting our economic regime. So clearly, for true political reasons, we are destroying competitive advantage of many countries. So you imagine the reversal. So the economy should be modest. First, to survive the war, and then to organize the economy. And second, remember how difficult it is to react to uncertainty. You decide a policy. Mr. Merkel was right. She could not, because it was to tame Russia and to involve it, Russia looking toward Europe. And Russia wants to look at Asia. So the bet could have been successful. If it's successful, now we have a dramatic revelation. She made all wrong. No, the world has been evolving in such a way that now she seems to have failed. But given the information, it was not that bad. So again, I will not develop it. We need a theory with how to decide with uncertainty. And this is totally dramatic for most of you. Let me now turn to the stuff we have today. I think as regulationists, we started studying carefully US because Michel Rieta, my friend, made these cases. I've been studying carefully European capitalism, and now all of us are studying China. And for us, it is a totally specific agreement because you have free compromise. At the society-wide level, you want population is given to accept delegation of power to the Communist Party, provided you have a good standard of living improving. It is an implicit contract. You give the political liberty, but at the local level, because I remember China is huge, you have many localities. My feeling is that you have local corporatism fighting in order to get market. And they are governed by the local representative Communist Party. So the Communist Party is giving the right to organize fusee property rights. In the return, if the region is successful, they can tax and provide. So you have a dynamic compromise between the public authority and the capitalists. And then you have a third compromise, state administration and state. In the sense, civil servants are rewarded for optimizing local growth and complying with the requirement of the state. For example, in the early phase, the faster growth, the faster employment, it was nice. Imagine you have contamination problems. The center in Beijing, they give new criteria in order the local authority to try to discipline. And this system is totally remarkable in the sense you have a strategic with a lot of innovation and flexibility as local. So in a word, it is the strict opposite of the Soviet model. In the Soviet model, everyone decided here the strength is, and by definition, which is very important, you have a very dynamic property in the sense that in the regulation theory, I call this competition-led, in the sense the firms are trying to form capital in such a way that prices are highly competitive price. I will surprise you, but the price in China are competitive. There are so many buyers. Whereas you have oligopoly price formation in US. So you have a reverse, you have a communist party running a perfect competition. Look, and US, you have a free market economy running, governing monopolies and nice. Wonderful role of ideology. It is strict. My neoclassical friends do not understand anything about this. China is more competitive, and they look, the attack on high tech is precisely to destroy the economic monopoly and future political economy as you cook. So clearly, the state is trying to be the only one to have the power, and the overall to follow, and competition is used to follow the objective of the Communist Party, not to provide the wealth of Telecom. Okay, so you see the big difference. So we have Tencent, so we have GAFAM and Tencent. You have the symmetry, but the one are running the political power in Chinese. They try to comply with the rules of the party. So you understand the problem of hierarchy. They play different games. One is purely capitalist, the other is political. It's a political game. And then let me, it is the center of my presentation. It is very quantitative. So science is a hypothesis. So I may surprise you, but imagine that you characterize the natural. In order to understand FDI, what are the requirements of the very specific development mode of China? Very specific. I had no time to develop it. And for me, it was competition-like. It is very nice because it is a very a rare regime. Therefore, this regime is generating specific problems. By definition, they are growing so quickly that they are the main buyer of natural resources. 40% of natural resources in the world are captured. And second element, since poor workers are unable, then go to my favorite research domain, Latin America. Latin America, you have very few capitalists. You have quasi-rentier economy, mixed with a little bit of industry. The extreme case is Venezuela. But the other case in Brazil, it could have been a natural power. It became a rentier economy due to the boom of the natural resource supply. So Latin America is the place to be. Therefore, in Latin America, so you have this model, it's very well known, extractivist model in the sense that you are mining, and all the budget, the standard of living, comes from the private revenue or taxation of the export. And it calls the extractivist model based on natural resources. And many people are, this is about the question of lithium, which there is a big competition of this. And you are competing. And then the charm of China is that China, you have a lot of potential offer, they have a requirement, firms are equally, and they try to find out the best suitable, putting competition into the member countries. So again, it is, you have an asymmetric power in the sense, the requirement of the firm, and they can select all over the world. They can go to Africa and so on. So you understand the name of the game. So you have one macro requisite and over coming from below, how to articulate. But the story is not over because you have also, by definition, this work, you know, the wage share is declining. Consumption are not be recovering. So you have a huge structural overcapacity. Now it is in the real estate sector, but you used to, therefore you have a basic, you have an excess of the trade balance due to the export. What to do? You have to find out people able to absorb. And alors, I would have been a symmetrical analysis of export, flow of export, and flow of FDI. In order to simplify, imagine it is only FDI. Okay. But not time just to play. First, you play the exportation, then the FDI. But imagine, then you have some country where FDI development, for example, all former Central or Eastern Europe was playing the FDI coming from Germany or other countries. And then you have, in this the case, you need by definition, the only engine of growth is coming. And therefore, you have a new negotiation. And my interpretation of the one road, one belt is to try to compatibilize the constraint strategy of a country who are not domestic engine of growth with the requirement of so you understand and look that it is a very different set of countries than the one you need to define the objectives in order to understand. So it's not global pressure. Everything is up, and then history happened. It is the regulation. You understand, right? But we have another phase because since 15 years, Communist Party is trying to organize inward looking strategy. And a series of papers showing that due to the strength of local corporatism, they are unable to propel wage growth and welfare growth in order to sustain. So they are trying, but they do not succeed. Therefore, you are totally different mechanisms because then you need two things. First, you need to have access on frontier technology in the sense that now when you are importing textiles or something, and then you need to have a new phase in which you increase the complexity, the components, and so it is all the formidable catching up of the diversity of it. And then, of course, it changed totally the direction of foreign investment. Therefore, you understand clearly that United States and Europe are the basic location of activity. And you have ICT-led development modes. I would say, I'm really missed, but I read Silicon Valley type capitalism. I was studied by my fellow Masaoki. In the sense, you are looking totally differently. Or you see, again, the need of flexibility in order to follow the strategy. So this is become upset, and you have a new one. And in this case, you have very different objectives. No? You go to Silicon Valley, you go to Road 28, you go to UK, very good in research and so on. So you, and then you try to have a new FDI and acquisition. So yeah, and it is why maybe code of conduct we are in it could be important, because you have to play a very different game. And then it's not the final story, because in my feeling, the big strategy is about build an autonomous innovation. If China wants to be independent, then you absolutely need to have your own sufficient system with stable complementarity for that resources. But all what's needed should be generated. And it is the basic conflict with the US, because the US thought Chinese were only copy making, like that used to be, according to a vision for Japan. But now they realize that in some case, digital economy is more advanced, far more. For the e-commerce is much more developed in China than in US. So, and then my reading, because I have a paper on or a presentation on this issue, it is basically you need to search for the pool of talented scientists all over the world to bring them by grants, by tenure, and so on, to develop all the domain of basic knowledge which is required for and you understand why you have you used to have 10 years ago 30,000 PhD students in US. It is massive. Imagine the people and the co-authored articles with Chinese. It is. It's like an explosion. Really, you cannot, in 10 years, it has been, China might become the first country in terms of academic paper. In quite any, so you understand the total different game. And I think what I propose for a group is try to analyze. And the difficulty of analysis is you have a strata, like in geology. You see, it's difficult to detect, because the most interesting is a chance, but you have, of course, to have cobalt, lithium. So you understand the complexity. You have a new extractivist model in Latin America just to make compatible. So it's why you have so many problems. It is why I would like to be young again, to start again a new career, because the task is enormous. By chance, you are younger than me. And maybe I hope to convince you. Yes, what is the concept here? Because I like to simplify, to make theories to simplify. To say, the world is awful, the world is chaotic, like Shakespeare. So my feeling is very simple. You have a very strong accumulation regime in China. It's in crisis, of course, but you have strong bases. You have political support. You have forces of production. So you should not underestimate. It's not a fragile, because American thinks one day up, China collapse, like Japan collapse after the bubble. So they crash out. US may crash out before China. Okay, so big effort. So you have requirements, and then you have international variety of them. So this is why I presented the variety. Because you can go to very, very different countries. For example, Chinese are looking at Scandinavian welfare system. So you see, you go all over the world and you select what is required for your own development. And this opens a wonderful mechanism of matching process of two development modes. And I will immediately, and so you understand then and why China is the dominant actor, because by definition, they have a clear objective, whereas most of countries have lost their own development strategy. It is the drama of Latin America. Even the Brazilians have been losing their spirit to become the more advanced industrial capitalists. So it is why China is so important, because they have a very clear, even contradictory regime, whereas most of countries are lost, and they think that the idea will try to resolve partially some of them. Then I derive from this, and I will stop very quickly, power asymmetry. I think regulation theory thinks that we have a review on regulation named institution and power, because it is a word that economists do not use. But you have because a lot of choice of China, but very few for Latin America, for the drama of Venezuela. I have only one thing to say: oil. And they failed the university in agriculture, failed anything. So they have no choice except to immigrant. So a lot of choice of China, very few for we country. Second, also implicit to the deep pocket of China. When you go, of course, such a river, you have a wonderful. Imagine I'm studying in Mexico, you have a quasi stagnation of real wages around 30 years. You don't in China, you invest in university in order to attract foreign people who could become the leader of the next era. So you understand how money is important, because you can provide huge grant of money, for example, to attracting talented workers in the US. Whereas financial dependency, pour go to Argentina, they have huge deficit, they cannot have to trade. When even Greece was rescued partially because the Chinese bought the harbor also. So you imagine the asymmetry again, because people are very eager to accept this, because it is a kind of rescue mechanism. It's not at all contribution to the development. Third, the charm of industrial workers. I was trained by Nicolas Caldo. I was a late pupil of Nicolas Caldo. And he convinced me the name of the game of division of is increasing return to scale. And increasing return to scale are now appearing in the GAFAM, but they have been totally eroded in Europe. This is why we are sorry. Whereas in China, you still have this mechanism in the sense that relative price can go down, and real income per capita can increase because you have this mechanism. And this gives an incredible opportunity, because you have stagnating cash flow with increasing cash flow, which gives naturally, and you know very well, the more natural resources you have, the more bad is. And the core example, because I visited Venezuela once upon a time, it was to be supposed as rich as the US for the middle class. Now, 70% are in the poverty. So yeah, because rent is only a name of grabbing and spending it by importing. Nothing is created in Venezuela. So you understand, China is building the productive force of the 21st century. Other countries are trying to survive. And we survive, and highly coordinated mechanism. So the Chinese society is very level of administration, very complex, but you do have a vision how to coordinate this complex process. So it's not simple, it's not command economy at all, but you design mechanism in order to correct from the center learning for the disequilibrium. And so you have clearly a clear vision of the direction. For example, we sad, we lost in France, we don't have any direction since 20 years. So let's go the markets of everything. China, you have people, the future is visual. It can be not happen, but they have a strategy. And imagine the success of China compared with society which have lost their faith in the ability to develop. If I'm true, it opens a wonderful agenda. First, the organigram of the Chinese state is impressive. And then to detect all the ministry, sub-ministry, and that guiding the decision of foreign direct investment for public and private firms, because private firms are not so private. Remember, they can be removed from, so clearly, because they are thinkers and they gather all the information we need to that. I would like to share with them their data bank, because it could help to solve the problem we mentioned this morning. I would like to, because clearly they have in mind what is required. And this is quite exceptional. In France, I was working, my first job is planning institution, and it was dissolved because with free market, we don't need them. In China, they keep some planning vision. And you have seen the power of the market, but it does not prevent to try to organize it. So first, second element, collect basic statistics. And it's what we saw this morning. It is very difficult because every accounting system depends on the objective of the people collectivity. And we should have our own definition, you know. But so, maybe it is the weakness of my presentation, because I would suppose very neat, very wonderful, like in physics, good data. But these data are very noisy, are fuzzy. So the big problem is that maybe you don't have sufficient clear information to test my proposition. Because you see the complexity, you have sectors, you have countries, it is highly third, I can provide you, because we all my friends, we have now a map of the taxonomy of accumulation regime and type of capitalism all over the world. So I'm tiling all this research, and you have strong convergence. So we have some results. So we can define, not for all the countries, but for major players, we have a clear definition, what are the game, what are the accumulation regime, which helps to characterize them. So we can pull and review this for the characterization objective, what I've been mentioning. And then, of course, you have a difficult methodology, because imagine the map of free advantage, the requirement of the, and I would think that it is like a, I miss the English term, how to open the door, you see. In some, I'll give you an example. In also Ski's analysis of variety of capitalism, we found that the revenue advantage of Europe, of Germany and US was complementary, because you are a two-sided. Here, the difficulty is enormous, because the complementarity is by sector and by country. So you need an incredible methodology, in my sense, to be invented to test the hypothesis. And you say the presentation this morning, we saw that we need this kind of. So wonderful agenda, I refer to you. I'm ready to participate, but it is maybe a decade-long ambition. Sorry for disappointing you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, sorry. Yes, I want maybe. Sorry, you can. Yes, yes. Please, the inspiration and the way how to generate this concept are only this book. So you can read it, so and then you invent your own concept. So it is, and I will present it tomorrow at the Assoc. So the matrix is this book, and then it's up to you to update, because the story matters.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Boyer. This is really a very rich and interesting framework, and I think from what I've seen, indeed, we are looking at different parts of that framework in Southeast Asia in many ways. And of course, the interesting thing becomes also if China's model changes and is changing, and is of course at the moment under considerable pressure given its current development stage and its troubles in the new era and the real estate sector. So there were very interesting variations from year to year, from period to period, that we can also explore. And the first one to try is Clement Séhier, who is coming to sit. The second person is next to me. Clement Séhier is going to talk about categorizing Chinese investment patterns in Southeast Asia, a four-sector analysis. And Clement is associate professor at the IMT North Europa and member of the Claire-C laboratory at the Université of Lille. His research focuses on the evolution of China's accumulation regime and China wage labor nexus, on corporate social responsibility of multinational corporations, and on global value chain. That's a very broad focus, I would say. But in this, he's going to look at the categorization of Chinese investment patterns, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you all in Singapore for inviting us here. So in this presentation, I would like to propose a framework which I hope you will find quite complementary, which the framework that Robert Boyer just proposed before me for analyzing Chinese investments at the sectoral level. So in doing so, I try to differentiate myself with the dominant interpretation of Chinese investments that would just like Chinese projection abroad, which would just be imposing its power on other countries. My interpretation is more in line with the research which insists on the plurality of motivations behind Chinese investments, and also on the diversity of ways Chinese companies invest, and also the variety of impacts of Chinese investments within receiving countries. In order to show that, it's important to open the black box of Chinese FDIs in Southeast Asia. And when we look at Chinese investments in each industrial sector, then it becomes more clear, I guess, first that the strategies of investments can vary greatly, and also that they respond to a large extent to internal contradiction within different sectors. So in other words, my presentation is trying to bridge the gap, at least to contribute to bridging the gap between, on the one hand, macro analysis of Chinese investments, such as the brilliant presentation we just had, and which rely mostly on macro data. And on the other hand, the now numerous case studies on Chinese investments in the ASEAN countries, which some of our groups are already doing. So I think a framework at meso sectoral level can give sense to this case study, and also to help building a coherent discourse in political economy analysis. So very, like in a very humble way, I also include myself in the regulation theory framework, and I also try to enrich its actually with a book which was published 20 years ago by Robert Boyer also, and Michel Fressinet, which looks more at the level, at the industrial level. Yeah. Basically, I start from the macro institution, but then I start to look at the firm strategy and how they also have to build compromise with a diversity of actors, trade unions, national or local states, etc., etc. So in the paper, which is actually now looking more like a big table, so far I try to provide some explanation for four sectors that are widely commented in the Chinese projections. So they are infrastructure and real estate, natural resources and energy, high-tech, like capital-intensive industries, and light manufacturing, which are more like labor-intensive industries. And that's the sector I will be presenting today, because of course I don't have the time to present all these four sectors, which are also like very broad definition of sectors, but you can, I hope, use this framework for more refined analysis of like more closely defined sectors. In the continuity also of the idea that the Chinese investment abroad are the results of rising contradictions within China's own regime of accumulation, you will see that the four first criteria relate to the situation within China, and the five last criteria relate to strategies and conditions of investments abroad per se. So when I say light manufacturing, I mostly will talk about like garment and textile, shoes, toys, and assembly. So I won't go. Yeah, sometimes the three other sectors will be used, but only to show some nuance with what's happening in light manufacturing and labor-intensive industries. So if I start presenting the 9 criteria of my classification, Of course, when you talk about Chinese capitalism, and it has just been done before, it's very important to start for each industrial sector by trying to assess the articulation of state and enterprise relations. So it's not enough to assess that China is a developmentalist state at the macro level, because the instruments of control and incentives may vary greatly from one industrial sector to another. Obvious and first observation we can make is that, for instance, in infrastructures and natural resources, companies are mostly public, and that in high-tech and light manufacturing, they are mostly private. In light manufacturing, the privatization movement actually dates back to the 90s. And as they are mostly like low capital intensive, they don't need massive support of the banking system. They can rely on their own fundings mostly. So overall, it's a relatively loose control from public institutions, which doesn't mean that there is no influence at all. For example, an institution with whom I've been working, the China National Textile and Apparel Council, plays an important role in networking and also following what are doing the Chinese firm, and they now are very much interested and actually following the Chinese investments in textile in Vietnam and Cambodia, for example. The second criteria is the accumulation strategy of firms, to which I add the official discourse on the sector. So to what extent, according to Chinese authorities, this sector is actually still strategic for them. So at first sight, the Chinese firms' behavior in light manufacturing could be seen as maybe the closest to market capitalism as we define it in the West, with a high degree of competition and a focus on short-term profitability. Also, among the four sectors that I study in this table, it can appear as the least strategic in the eyes of Chinese authorities. They were at the core of industrial development for 30 years, since the 1980s. But since 10 years, the government is putting much more emphasis on industrial upgrading, which progressively implied to get rid of this low value added, low wages, polluting, so like bad reputation industries. But here it's important to stress that it's a progressive movement, because also in terms of social stability matters, still like dozens of millions of jobs are concentrated in these industries. So they cannot get rid of it from one year to another. Still, despite this social stability factor, light manufacturing doesn't appear as important as, for example, natural resources or high tech in the official discourse. Even some Maoist time words and expressions are now revived, like the expression the Zeligensheng in the natural resources, which relates more or less to autarky in the 60s, now is used to make sure that China has enough natural resources and energy to maintain its productive system and the level of production. So when we read, for example, the investments in dams in Laos, this is something which is often used. And in high tech, as you just mentioned, with the technical frontier, like the term "chuangxin", like being able to have our own system of technology without being dependent on Japan and the US is very important, and it also implies to develop new markets in high tech in other countries. So in that matter, light manufacturing seems a bit less strategic in the eyes of Chinese authorities. So they will also not benefit as much as strong support as the other, for example, as Yuen presented yesterday in the mining sector. The third criteria, which I think is important, but I will be very quick on this one because I've been working too much on it probably, is the type of productive organization and the main type of labor relations within a specific sector, which also explains a lot in the FDI strategy. So if very quickly we present light manufacturing in China in terms of productive organization and labor relations. It's been well studied. We have a progressive but still slow rise in minimum wages, a slight development of social protection schemes, but the working conditions haven't been changing so much. It's still relying mostly on migrant workers with low wages, high flexibility, very high flexibility, long working hours, and so on. Then the last of the internal criteria consists in summarizing the main challenges that the industrial sector are currently facing in China, within China. Light manufacturing within China is facing many challenges. We've been talking about this morning and yesterday as well. Of course, the rise in labor costs is the most obvious, but also the objective of industrial upgrading to reach higher standards of production in terms of environment and labor makes this sector face more and more challenges. But maybe right now the external pressure may be even stronger. It started with the rising taxes decided by the Trump administration. But maybe on the long run, what is more important is rising competition from Southeast Asian countries in global value chains, as now buyers from all over the world are willing to diversify their sources of production, which is already resulting in a shift in the organization of global value chains. So this leads us to the second level of this classification, focusing directly on rationales and impacts of Chinese or FDIs. So there is, of course, a strong continuity between the challenges faced within China and the reasons for Chinese companies to invest abroad. In light manufacturing, they are looking for lower production costs, less stringent environmental regulations, but also in the ASEAN context, they want to benefit from the multiplication of trade agreements in the regions. It will be discussed by Tuan right after. So it's not so much long-term investments with an attempt to access local markets, like in high-tech, for example, deals like the ones in infrastructures or natural resources. Here, the production of Chinese firms in Vietnam or Cambodia, for example, is mostly aiming at being re-exported afterwards. Putting this context also helps us understanding which ASEAN countries are the main target of FDIs for each sector. So that's my sixth criteria. Here, the picture is still a bit complex to draw, actually, because these massive relocation started in 2017-18 on a massive scale. And then the COVID broke down and slowed the process. But it appears that the countries of peninsular Southeast Asia so far are the first recipients of Chinese investment in light manufacturing. Vietnam has probably the one with the strongest capacity to attract investment in many different sectors, from garments to electronic assembly. In the low cost part of light manufacturing, Cambodia is also playing a big role. And yeah, I just come back from field work, as I mentioned this morning, in Central Java in Indonesia, which has, for example, a very low minimum wage, which is trying to play its role in this changing in global value, Asian global value chains. And in their discourses, when you visit industrial zones there, they really compete in their mind with Vietnam, like not Cambodia. They don't want the low-cost inline manufacturing. They are more trying to get some, they would say high tech, but you understand that it's like kind of this kind of electronic assembly, for example. But so far, they are not receiving that many investments from China in particular. They are a bit lagging behind, but they expect. So I think that's something to keep following. 7 criteria. So the first and second criteria I mentioned, like state-enterprise relations and the accumulation strategies of firm, also help understanding which type of which terms and conditions of Chinese investments abroad by sector are used. I will not go too much because this is a very large one, and Elsa also will talk about it right after this. But what kind of legal, financial, and also political arrangements are made when Chinese firms are investing abroad? And once again, like it can seem at first sight more easy in like manufacturing, like very much more like a market oriented strategy without too much support from the state. But then if we look, for example, as Aymeric will do as a special economic zone in Cambodia, we see that there are still, even in this sector, some strong political arrangements. And we also discussed like there is also quite a complex, it's quite complex to trace back these investments because some of them are channeled through Hong Kong and Singapore, and very often it's a small amount of money which is invested, so it's not easily tracked in data. Then my two last criteria are an attempt to assess the effects of Chinese investment by sector in receiving countries. So the 8th criteria is to take seriously the official discourse on BRI, on Chinese projection from the Chinese part, but also from the receiving countries. They all have, and also Chinese firms as well, have developed some beautiful discourses of development, which that was socio-economic development, creating a virtual circle. There is all this connectivity discourse of the Better World initiative, of course. And if we look more specifically at light manufacturing, the idea that integration into global value chains is a chance to take part in the globalization and then to progressively climb the ladder of industrial upgrading, that it will also lead to formalization of wage labor contracts, more formal labor relations, that also we will need these territories will need better infrastructures, and so on and so on. I'm finishing very quickly with maybe the most important criteria, which is the actual impacts for receiving territories. And for this one, we need a lot of in-depth analysis on the ground as well. At first sight, in light manufacturing, the financial and environmental risks seem to be less important than, for example, infrastructures or in natural resources, though there still have many like environmental problems linked to light manufacturing. So, for example, in Indonesia, they are trying to reduce and to limit at least the potential investment in garments because it's using a lot of water, for example. And I think finally, in this light manufacturing, the main dilemma for host countries is it actually going to lead to some social development, or because we have to remain attractive to foreign investments, to maintain low wages, and so like to maintain very bad social working conditions for the working class? And we see that there are still like some discontents in Cambodia and Indonesia and Vietnam, the 3 countries I've mentioned right before that. So in very brief conclusion, because I know I have already passed the time I was supposed to use, no, I just hope it wasn't too dull. Like this a very classified way of presenting things, but I think it's important to have this kind of discussion also to try to how do we talk okay at the macro level, but also when we speak differently about our different case studies and at the sectoral level as well. No, I just want to say, like, so it's very complicated to try to make a full chart alone, and so I'm really calling for more collaborative work, and I hope we can go further and work all together in this room and with people online as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Very good. Well, I think you have done a tremendous job in a bit more than the time allotted, because you do not only, if you want to make Professor Boyer's theory on the supply of FDI, but you also look at the demand side, or if you want the host country side, which I think is as important. I recognize that Professor Boyer, it's not that he glanced over it, but he said, well, look, China has a choice and they're shopping around, but there are actually also on the destination side, there are preferences, there are objectives and comparative advantage. So there is also economics there. In that sense, it's very interesting. All right, I do know we're running out of time, and I do a terrible job as chairman, but that's also because I have to change chairs all the time. So that's my excuse. But we now have a very important presentation and an interesting one from two speakers on the Chinese foreign direct investments in Singapore. So that is of particular interest for us here in Singapore, but it's also because it has some very interesting and peculiar features that are important for our overall research. And I'm sure we're going to hear from the speakers. We have two great speakers. One is really the beating heart of this whole project, and that is Professor Elsa Lafaye. She works at the Centre Asie du Sud-Est, the case at the Université de Rennes, and she is also a visitor at the Institut Pondok Perancis Kuala Lumpur. I like saying that in that way. And she has, for the past 20 years, she has been conducting research in political economy on Southeast Asia and related to the topic of today. She has a longer CV. I won't read it out because we're already quite out of time. The second speaker is Caroline Poisson, who is, after having received a master's degree in business law, she is now, and which she has finished in Vietnam, she is now a PhD student at the Université of Poitiers, and her research is focused on the circulation of obligations in comparative law between France and Singapore, which is quite interesting. It is actually related to our foreign direct investment, because there you do have accountabilities and obligations, and that's changed from country to country. So it is really an interesting topic. I'll leave my chair to Caroline and give the floor to Elsa.
Thank you very much, Bert. Thank you all for being here. So the beating heart of the project will just scratch the FDI in Singapore today, but I'm very happy of what we have heard already. So without waiting more, I will share the screen and try to get our PowerPoint open. So this one is. So then, and then this one I have to hide. So I hope you can hear me well, and let's start. So is the third presentation, of the political economy of China's outward foreign direct investment in Southeast Asia, an assessment, and we will deal about the FDIs from China in Singapore. We will be on very precise and quite trivial aspect of the topic, but we think we need to start by that. China has emerged as an important source of outward foreign direct investment to Southeast Asian countries in the recent years, and is now considered as the most influential economic power in Southeast Asia, according to the ICS report this year. Statistics from the ASEAN Secretariat showed that China was the second investor in ASEAN in 2017, with $18 billion to Southeast Asia. Forecasting that if China maintained its current investment trajectory, it would become a dominant investor in the region was easy then. But since 2019 and 20, the pace has slowed down, and pandemic, Russia's war against Ukraine are now at stake. Turbulent times are here, as in Robert Boyer's words, and in order to face these turbulent times, we have to first be intellectually equipped for this, and two, know precisely what was going on before entering them. So this second point is the objective of this short presentation as far as the China's FDI to Singapore are concerned. So here we will focus on the context of these FDIs, measure, structure, and legal forms, paving the way for the second and third session of this seminar. We will deal with Singapore further. The very construction of the scientific object is simultaneously a process and a result. The abductive approach that the regulation theory is appreciating enables the emergence of new phenomena to be identified, and it proceeds from the starting point of stylized facts to the construction of the theoretical corpus. But at this stage of our inquiry, we do not start from stylized fact, neither from a research question. We just want to start from the comprehensive collection of the sources of statistics from 2000-2005 to 2020, from the ASEAN statistical data, the MOFCOM China, the UNCTAD, and the Global China Investment Tracker, in order to build robust facts from an organized set of figures, trends, and structure. So let's come into the PowerPoint. That is the content, and we go now to the introduction. So China OFDI to Singapore are contributing indeed to a long-established and well-connected regional investment hub. Without surprise, China OFDI to Singapore are at the crossroads of a triple dynamic. First, the rise of China OFDI to the rest of the world, so it will come very soon, is one. Second, the fast-growing ASEAN gaining weight in the global FDIs is an element, but also from Japan. According to the METI, the Japanese ministry, yearly surveys from 10 years, factory location progresses in Southeast Asia, while they are regressing in China. Third trend, we have a lasting and extreme international opening and integration of Singapore in the world economy. That can be looked from here. And if you look at the inward direct foreign investment to ASEAN countries, Singapore is the most well doted by the rest of the world. So Singapore as a regional hub is allowing Chinese companies to both access its mature and affluent local market and jump into the ASEAN market. But there is more than that. And Singapore remains closely connected to the US, the Japanese economy, as well as the Europe. In addition to ASEAN, the island state is also a member of multiple trans-regional networks, as Eric Frécon has reminded us in a recent publication. All these elements explain the centrality of ASEAN in the China's FDI projection, as it is for the global FDI projection to Southeast Asia. So Singapore, we will now assess Singapore's centrality to China's FDI projection in Southeast Asia. So clearly, we saw the lion's share of the China's FDI is in Southeast Asia, is for Singapore. You see Singapore is of the 10 most important Chinese investment recipients from 2005 to 2021, according to the China Global Investment Tracker, which is a database tracking the transaction from China to the rest of the world from 100 million of dollars. So Singapore for the period is $37.1 billion. Here, if you look at the breakdown of China global FDI by region, this one has been done with Minuat Chiang 1 or 2 years ago. You see ASEAN in yellow here became 2018-2019 the first region receiving Chinese FDI. So ASEAN becomes the first for China and Singapore the first in the ASEAN. So that's the data. The centrality is so here clearly expressed. And if we look at the China's outward investment to Singapore for themselves in millions of dollars, you see it will reach 6-7 billion in the last part of the 2010s. So we have a major extension of China OFDI to Singapore, okay. Initial project at that stage, then the surge, we change of scale between 2004 and 2009, but then it's really the golden years, 2011, 2018. Since 2018, the investment from China to Singapore has drastically dropped in 2019 and 2020, but 2021 already we are Southeast Asia is receiving 13 billion of dollars, and Singapore has the biggest part of it. Now, now we come into the more detailed trends. If we follow the the framework of the diversity of capitalism in order to assess the general analysis of the Chinese FDI to Southeast Asia, the structure of China's direct investment in Singapore has to be explained in this aspect, and we will use, like Clement, a sectoral vision lecture. So here is the Chinese investment ESOA by industrial sector. We see that this is itself evolving. We have a gradual sectoral transformation from the energy, which was in the 2005, for instance, the big bulk until 2008, even 2009. And then the energy part has been decreasing. Here is the boom of mining and metal, hunger for metal from China. And then again decreasing at the profit of first infrastructure, then others, among them manufacturing. So according to this view, we are quite consistent with the traditional explanation of the FDIs from China to SEA as a whole that Clement started to deconstruct, and that also Robert is really engaging us to unmake. According to this general picture, Chinese company go to SEAs for first because of the China's-US dispute, then because of low wages, also to access to natural resources, sometimes to benefit from a weak rule of law locally, and finally because of the lack of workforce they are facing in China itself. But of course, all this element of explanation doesn't fit the Singapore picture, the Singapore characteristics. So here, if we still go into the data from the ASEAN states, ASEAN Secretariat, we are very precious to understand the sectors. It's an overview for ASEAN as a whole. You see manufacturing has faced a strong change because manufacturing was 10% in 2008, 33% in 2018. Mining normally should be on the map, but has disappeared, was something like 10-12 here. but then more in 2013 and then vanished. Construction was big in a moment, but then in the recent period, no. And wholesale and retail is progressing. So this, we can find this also in the Singapore data. Why? Because Singapore is such a big part of the Chinese FDIs that we have first necessarily a kind of meeting point between these trends. However, so I skip on it. So studying the investment, we already established that there are two moments of time in the period, but Singapore is always first. So if we look at Singapore more specifically, and here I rely on the China Global Investment Tracker transactions records by industries. What do we see? That first, if we look at the amount, Singapore is playing still, and for China, the role of the entrepot. So that's why I was mentioning a lasting role of regional entrepot. 12.3 billion of dollars, meaning 33% of the total of the 37 billion that China has been invested along FDIs in the country since 2007. 32% are for entrepot function with logistics. So logistics is physical, but now also digital. Aviation with the company Asiana that has been bought in 2011. Maritime with Costco. An enormous warehouse has been built by China Vanke, starting from 20 malls, then buying GLPs, one of the biggest warehouse operator in the world in 2017. Plus, we also find Huawei premises or Alibaba premises still in the entrepot function. So Singapore plays this role. Then another part of the story is given to us by petroleum and chemical investment from China to Singapore. And here we have 6 billion of US dollars, so the half of the entrepot function. From Huang, $3 billion, the oil refinery, then to CNPC, the famous public company on petroleum, then 2.2 billion US dollars in 2009, so quite early, Sinopec 2013, etc. Also real estate. So for my colleagues, very keen towards real estate things, and also geographers in France that are studying this point, real estate come only next with 5.1 billion US dollars, again with China Vanke, but also MCC, Xinjiang International, etc. Among them, Alibaba has also a real estate operation, 600 million in 2020. With Minua, we were so sure that finance will be an important sector that China is investing in Singapore. Answer is yes, but in the total is not the main one because the entrepot function is still first. So we have the city capitalism of Singapore is related to the global finance and is a key turning point. Is 2.5 billion data in 2015 and 2016. And I will just end with the idea of platform capitalism. Alibaba, Grab, the IA data center that has been opened for Alibaba in 2022, etc. We can see that this high-tech investment in Singapore are very massive. And if we look just Alibaba is 6.6 billion that have been invested by Alibaba in the very recent years since 2014 in Singapore, with a large diversity of fintech, digital logistics, communication, real estate, etc. So finally, with this data, we can also observe a trend that has been noted by Yuen, Ao, and Suyong No in their study on China's merger and acquisition in SEA that is date from 2019. Singapore position as a FDI recipient is inscribed in the trend of first, growing share of private companies, so private companies versus the SOEs. They were less than 20% in 2006 and they are still 50% of the FDIs in 2017. So in Singapore, we see the same trend. So also, we have a shift from the infrastructure and resource extraction. So Singapore has not very much been concerned with that, but of course, new technology and new industries is part of it. Finally, there is a rise of merging and acquisition amidst FDIs. According to the Untitled report 2018, China has appeared as a major player of the global mergers and acquisition in the world. In 2017, for instance, the China mergers and acquisition overseas were higher, the amount was higher than the US ones, with 19% of the total in the world. And this, when we go in the details of this investment, we find it also. So conclusion, the study of China's expanding transnational investment activities and networks, especially the EAI, often runs the risk of being too abstracting, homogenizing, and essentializing. You know this criticism. The method of entering into its topic from a specific country, state, territory, in a sectoral and comparative, that is still to be conducted by us, perspective, and the fine-grained measuring tools might allow to prevent this pitfall. So now, in order to further the analysis, let's allow Caroline Poisson to help us to decipher the legal forms of this financial activity in Singapore from China.
It's going to be a quick introduction to investment law because we are running out of time. We're trying to explore the legal form of China investment, foreign investment in Singapore. So, first of all, an investment in law doesn't mean the same as for an economist. For us, lawyer, kind of, an investment is the action or process of putting money into something to make a profit. It's a general definition. But it can be various legal versions, it can be anything. It can be buying share for buying company, of course. It can be merger and acquisition. You buy a company kind of to make them merge into another entity. It can be creating a subsidiary abroad. So it can be really anything. It's not exactly the same same regulation for all those kind of operation. So that's our start. As legal person interested, what are our legal tools to frame investment? We have several layers. The first layer, the external one, if I can say, is the multilateral treaties. We have a lot of them, and I will not go into further detail into it because we are running out of time, and you're probably more aware of what is going on in ASEAN than I am. Just really quickly, we have the first one is ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement, which came into force in 2012. And it's revised quite often. I think it's every 2-3 years. We have an updated version, so something that is really, really good because it adapts to the evolution of the markets. This agreement is nice because it's useful at least because it sets out a guideline for aligning and promoting investment rules in ASEAN countries. So it set up big guideline for ASEAN countries. The problem is China is not a part of ASEAN, so we need to find something else. That's why we cannot understand this agreement without looking at the China-ASEAN Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement from 2002, I think. And we also have the ASEAN-China Investment Agreement that is really specialized on investment that you need to understand both of them to understand how does it work. What are the connections between the multilateral treaties? We also have the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This one is really famous because it's something that is really recent. For the investment part, what's important here? It prevents adoption of further restrictive measures within the signatories, which means that you can't limit by any means the investment within the ASEAN and the other signatories of this agreement. So it's important for investors. There is also a built-in investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, but I won't enter into details because it's really too much for the time I have left. So first layer, multilateral treaties. Then we have bilateral agreements. So China, Singapore, what's going on between them? The first bilateral investment treaty was signed in 1985, so it's really old, and it was replaced in 2008 by China-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. And same as the other, it's really the latest amendment was in 2019, I think. What's interesting is the FTA. It's this one is incorporated into the ASEAN agreement. So it's interesting because it's the only ASEAN country that has this special treatment that FTA included in an ASEAN agreement. So it's nice. It's a small particularity that is interesting. What's important? Another bilateral treaty is the double taxation agreement. In 2 words, really quickly. You're a Chinese investor. You want to become a shareholder of a Singaporean country, Singaporean company, sorry. Then you will obtain dividends annually, instead of being a shareholder. These dividends, if you want to bring them back with you in China, where are you going to pay taxes? Are you going to pay them in Singapore or in China? That's why we have double taxation agreement, because it's the principle that you don't tax something twice. So we have those kind of agreements to make them pay only in one place. So it's important for investors to know where they are going to pay taxes. Because of course they want to pay less taxes as possible. It's an old agreement. This one is from 2007. But the first one was signed in 1986, which clearly shows that both countries are really aware of the problematic of investment. And it's an old topic. So, multilateral treaties, bilateral agreements, and then domestic law. How does it work in China and how does it work in Singapore? In China, I will talk really quickly about China law. How does it work for an investment? Because when a Chinese businessman tries to invest somewhere else, he will necessarily have a part of a legal culture. You expect things to be kind of the same as his own country. In China, we have a foreign investment law that is new from 2020. Came into force into 2020, and this law is really interesting because it's unified. Previously there is three laws related to investment, so it's a big step to make it think clearer. And it's important because it protects intellectual property rights, which means that in theory, administrative authority, Chinese administrative authority cannot force technology transfer. So it's important for an investor to know that he will have to give all his trade secrets to someone else. That's important as well. So it's, I need to talk about that. So the first idea. This law is important in China because it makes things clear and it adds something that was previously only implemented in Shanghai Free Trade Zone. We have what we call the negative list. It's a list of things that where foreign investor can't invest because it's a sensitive subject. It's media, it's tobacco, it's mining, it's a kind of subject where China doesn't want any foreigner. And you can appreciate the degree of openness of a country by looking at the sectors that are not freely available to foreign investment. And the 2022 China's negative list only has 117 subjects, industries that are restricted, against 151 in 3 years ago. So it's slowly getting smaller, which means it became more open to investment. This is what happened in China. In Singapore, how does it work? Singapore, in contrast, don't have any foreign investment law, which is really interesting, because if there is no law, there is less control. There is a very specific limitation by two ways. Is legislative restriction, which means there is a small law again on real estate and media. And in the law itself on real estate, you have a part which says, oh, we don't want foreigner to buy property in that part of the area. So it's a small legislative regulation. So this is the first type of limitation. The other one is licensing regime, which means that if you want to make a bank in Singapore, you have to ask for a license. It's the same for if you are Singaporean or if you are from somewhere else. Singapore is really open to the investor because you have the tax-friendly system. Yeah. You're really open to investor, and I think I will stop there because otherwise it's going to be too long. It's too bad because I will talk about contracts. That's because in practice, investment, yeah, sure, it's great, but how does it work? Practice. It's through international contract, and international contracts, it's something that's really risky because you're never sure that the other party, which is not from the same place, but you're never sure you are talking about the same thing, it's the same world. So it's difficult to make things work. It's often it's a good place to legal disputes. And so I was comparing between national courts and arbitration of the work on the two, which one is better for the investor. I'm sorry, it's too short.
You finished?
Yeah, I would say it's finished.
Okay. But I would like to give a few minutes for questions, and starting from online. I don't see any hand raised at the moment, but feel free to either raise your hand or put the question in the chat, or leave it to the next session where we will also have some questions and answers. I think in the three presentations complement each other very well, even though I'm still yet in a mystery of Singapore. And I know that I cut the presentation short, but we are 20 minutes over time. And because it is 60%, more than 60% of the investment from China into ASEAN, but obviously it doesn't stay here. And as Caroline already said, one of the reasons why it's coming here is actually the legal, this very strong legal, simple and strong legal framework here for foreign direct investment. But that still doesn't solve my problem. Either A, where's the money going, but B, how then that legal framework in Singapore applies to the rest of ASEAN, because there the legal frameworks are still weak. So I'm still a bit puzzled of why everybody goes through Singapore, but that's maybe something to investigate. I still do not see any hands online, so I'm going to ask here in the room. Okay. First our guest, and then Chengang, and then Liao. You can, I think, speak. We have a microphone here that should pick it up. They'll pick that up too. That noise, so you can just speak, but speak a bit with a higher voice.
Okay, thank you. I'll go quickly. I'm interested in the issue that Caroline has brought up between national court and arbitration. I'm interested to know more, but probably we could explain a little bit more about how in practice these two forms of institution can apply the legal framework of different kind of treaties between China and ASEAN, China and Singapore. How does it apply? Thank you.
That's a tricky question. If you're an international court, you have to apply what's the law. You have to apply first the treaty, then you can do bilateral treaties, and then you go on domestic. But the thing is, it's international contract. Then the law is already the party choose what law they want to be. It's said on the contract here. Let's say, I want to be judged by a court or whatever, Singaporean court, okay. And then I want the law to be applied. I want the British law to apply. So it's a national law. I have to apply it to British law, even though they don't know anything about British law. That's why it's a tricky question. That's for national courts. For the arbitration, it depends. It depends because arbitration, but yeah, so completely free to do whatever they want. They can say, oh, you can do it in equity, but good for you. Is it okay? This party do that to me. Good with that. We're going to arbitration, and they can do whatever they want. If you don't want to apply any law, they can. So that's why it's a really question. We can discuss about that.
All right, Chen, go.
Yeah, I have a question to Professor Boy. Yeah, actually, I like your idea that we're facing competition among different kinds of capitalisms. Yeah, I assume China is adopting the state-led capitalism, while US is a free market. So how would you project the future of the global capitalism, of global market system? Yeah, will that lead, for example, to war, as previous history told us? Because in Europe, we also see that the competition among different kinds of capitalisms, like Anglo capitalism versus continental capitalism. Then we have two wars. Or we can avoid that. We can have mutual understanding and common prosperity.
Come tomorrow, I can suggest, because I think at 4 scenarios. One, the idea of one world, segmentation world, Chinese hegemony, and what is the impact of the various modes, and the uncertainty, how do actors now do interact toward which system. And my feeling is that you are a retreat from the international arena with the COVID and so on. So my first argument would be regional integration, because it is very important, the deepening of relations in North America with Mexico, in ASEAN, and even in Europe, the strengthening of Europe with all the problems. And in between, and maybe the world order will be the outcome of this free regional zone, interacting with the big fight, Europe in between China and so my fear is that one of the scenario includes war, because in the regulation interpretation of being transforming the US and Europe, without First World and Second World War, for example, 4 days would have never happened. This is my hunch. So the big question is that in the past, the hegemony has been restored by big war. And my wish is not to have a third war to solve, because with the present actors, it will be the end of the earth. Okay, so clearly it is very, very difficult. And last, the lack of bargaining power of United Nations institution. I was amazed. You will need more and more interaction, and de facto you have a national backlash. So, and this is very impressive. So in the sense, the probability of war is augmenting with the inability to organize bargaining at the world level. And okay, so really, I have a special map with exactly this answer, but it is again 1 hour presentation.
Well, so but you started out with the right thing. Anybody who's deeper interested in this question, tomorrow night, Professor Boyer is giving a presentation of his book, The Political Economy of Capitalism, at the Alliance Française here, chaired by Elsa. And so if you want to hear more on this theme, I would recommend you to join that. Liao, final question, and then I'll wrap it up.
Okay, yes, actually my question related to the first two presentation. So in my mind is that about the capitalism, you emphasize more about the national capitalism of China actually. So how about the private sector? Because in terms of the internal pressure, also mentioned in the second presentation, actually there are also internal pressure from China inside its development mode. So the early period is the market fragmentation, like higher at the beginning it invest in Europe. It's because they cannot sell their product to other provinces, right? That's early. And then later period, like recently, Geely, invest like buy Volvo, right? But that the reason is that Geely cannot compete with the state-controlled company like Yiqi, Shaanxi. So it tries to, actually it cannot get much of the technology from all. It's just get a reputation, and then they can sell better in China market. And actually in their data, it's their majority of their share of market still profit still from the China market. And then also for the third type of internal pressure is the competition between big company and small company. We know about the Huawei, right? But actually in China, there are lots of other small cell phone producers. So actually they cannot compete with Huawei within China. So they go to Africa, they go to India, and they make very good success. So for this kind of FDI, in terms of competition, actually they are more like a market style competition, right? So I don't know if how people think about this kind of Chinese FDI.
You did propose a kind of ASEAN vision. You have so many places, so de facto you have a market. But nevertheless, all the firms in China are facing the same concept. Imagine you do not overcome the real estate crisis. You have inflation. So both of them share common things. So if they escape for the Chinese domestic arena because they have contradictions, so they share something. But you are totally right. They totally differ. And second, you have to investigate all the opposition within the Chinese firms. And in the high-tech sector, you clearly have some of them want to become global, whereas it was not at all the objective. So clearly, yes, I've not detailed, but you have a fight. It's not because it is coordinated, but it is peaceful. On the contrary. So you have to now to deal with the international struggle, which is another element. The meso argument, you have pressure from both sides, and how do you? So you are totally right, but you imagine the field work to do so. I do agree with you. Capitalism is not one of my favorite books. Is Will Capitalists Kill Capitalism? Because it's the drama of capitalism. The inner contradiction of capitalism is destroying the institution of capitalism. So and this could happen in China. The very dynamism of state-led could lead to its demise. And I think the Communist Party is here to watch in order to prevent this to open. So you are totally right, but in one, too many times, I could not develop all the sophistication. I will concentrate on EAI, it's just general hypothesis, but you have a huge field work to do. I do agree with you. China is very contradictory, sort of, and it opened a wonderful field work. It's not, my coordination is ex post result. It's not given, coordinated, no? Ex post. And sometimes it might fail. If you have too much ideology and no perspective, it might fail coordination.
Yeah, like Huawei.
And it is open. So you see, be careful. I'm not functionalist at all.
Yes, so a very short observation to which confirms what you're saying, but I thought one is the main observation as well, is the fact that it's been more than 10 years that we say that China will evolve from investment-led or export-led type capitalism to consumption-led, and this actually doesn't happen. And so the Chinese market itself is not expanding that fast if we look at the macro level. And so, of course, it implies for firms to look at other markets abroad and in IT or in many sectors. They are looking also for new market opportunities. Somehow the Chinese market is already saturated.
Like shopping, like the internet ICT or internet industry. Yeah, that actually is crowding out from China.
And if you want, like the idea of the group to be like a leader in new technology, for this you need use the US did it with a huge inner market.
All those just focus on the state. They call the 国家队 national team. Actually, the private sector are crowding out by those national teams like Alibaba, Shopee, and this company I think they have made big difference in ASEAN countries. Like recently, I heard that for Shopee, they just suddenly cut a whole team of 60 PhDs. Those people, this just arrived Singapore and they got their offer canceled. And this is like this kind of things is spreading now. It's quite volatile for Singapore job market.
This PhD is from where?
Most are from China.
That's maybe too micro. That's too micro. Let me wrap it up. I mean, I think we've discussed a good broad framework that is quite flexible for new developments, and those new developments, Clement's already referred to it. I mean, we're probably going to have an awful lot more of foreign investment from China, at least in the next couple, 5-6 years, because it's going to be massive saving surpluses in China because of the troubles in the real estate economy and also sort of the end of the infrastructure investment. So I see a big wave coming. How that gets allocated remains to be seen. And it is interesting that indeed quite a few private investors would rather invest somewhere else because maybe the state has become too interested in their domestic operation. So I think Alibaba is going to be a bigger firm internationally than domestically, frankly. That will happen over time. But that, of course, has lots of consequences for Southeast Asia. So lots of dynamics. I think we're not there yet to describe all of that. I do think the categorization that was mentioned is an important one. I think the central role of Singapore is of course also Hong Kong, but Singapore is very important to understand that deeper. And once again, Caroline, sorry for shortcutting your presentation because the legal framework is the secret ingredient there. We know it. I am 35 minutes late. I failed completely. Let's take a 5 minutes break and then we go with the next session. And thanks everybody online for their patience and interest. See you in 5 minutes.
Let's start.
Yeah, thank you.
So the session 2 that we are opening now will cross regional perspective with Chen from the East Asian Institute. He's the Assistant Director and Senior Research Fellow of the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore. He joined the East Asian Institute in 2007. He is tracing China's politics, foreign policy, environmental and energy policies, and has published on this topic. Chen, because we are very late and we want to listen to you about climate-related investments from China in Southeast Asia. So it's your
Thank you, Elsa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really my pleasure to join this session, and I enjoy the early discussion very much. So my topic is about China's renewable energy investment in Southeast Asia. We all know that energy issue is a very important part for China's Belt and Road strategy. And these days, actually, China is shifting its previous investment in conventional energy sectors into the renewable, in Chinese words, the new energy sectors. Yeah. Partially because of China's quest for global climate leadership. We know that previously, actually, China has often been pressured or even attacked by many other countries for the large carbon emissions. But these days, especially after Xi Jinping came to power, I think you can criticize him for a lot of policy initiatives, but on the climate and environment, especially from his open rhetoric, we can see that he pays a lot of attention to the climate and environmental commitments. Especially, I think since 2 years ago, we committed to the United Nations that China is going to reach this carbon neutrality by 2060. That was a big, I think, improvement from previous Chinese carbon pledges. And more importantly, I think since last year, Xi Jinping also at the United Nations said that actually China will stop all the overseas coal investment, of course, along the Belt and Road and also in other regions. So we know that actually China previously invested intensively in the fossil fuels, coal and gas and oil, and also hydropower. So we can see that actually in the future, more focus will be on the renewable energy, especially in the South Asia. Probably one of the most important parts for China's Belt and Road strategy. And I have to say that actually China has certain advantage in pushing forward this kind of renewable energy investment, because China actually is a leader in global renewable power generation and also related equipment manufacturing. China is the world's largest renewable energy developer, as well as a producer of relevant equipments like solar panels and wind turbines. And so we see that the solar wind turbine production accounted for 45%, while solar panel more than 70%. So that gives China a lot of advantages. And also China itself is a huge overcapacity domestically. It produces much more equipment than it needs itself domestically. I think many people are from Europe here, you know that this solar panel has become, the trade disputes has become so big that the EU and US also investigate anti-subsidy investigation over Chinese solar panels previously. So also, let's look at the demand side. In previous, we also mentioned we not only need to look at the supply side, we also need to look at the demand side for the investment. Southeast Asia is also having huge demand for renewable energy investment. First of all, energy demand itself in Southeast Asia has increased a lot, on average by around 3% a year over the past 2 decades, and expected to increase by 60% by 2040, in line with the region's rapid economic growth. Its growth in electricity demand at an average of 6%, even more than energy demand, has been among the fastest in the world. However, as a net energy importer, Southeast Asia still needs to import more than 40% of its total energy supply import. So there's a shortage here, the energy shortage, severe energy shortage for whole Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia has considerable potential for renewable energy, but excluding the traditional use of solid biomass, it currently meets only around 15% of the region's energy demand. So the renewable energy proportion is still very low. So the ASEAN, the 10-member ASEAN, is targeting 23% share of renewables in total primary energy supply and a 35% share in installed power capacity by 2025, with energy intensity to drop 32% from 2005 levels. 9 ASEAN members have pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 or later, in accordance with the Paris Agreement climate goals. So if they really want to achieve this net zero pledge, they have to speed up the renewable development. So I think Southeast Asia's clean energy transition aligns with major powers' climate pledges. Renewable energy like solar, onshore, offshore wind, hydropower, biofuel, and geothermal energy will play a key role in the energy transition and mitigation effort in Southeast Asia. So some countries like Indonesia, these are big economies here. Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam are expected to see some of the largest renewable capacity expansions in Southeast Asia. So the next decade will be crucial for ASEAN's clean energy transition, as the region is still facing severe challenges from both catastrophic climate consequences and energy supply shortage. So a lot of major economies will offer their options or solutions to the clean energy transition to Southeast Asian countries. So not only China. So let's look at China's growing energy investment in Southeast Asia. So with growing economic linkages between China and Southeast Asia, foreign investments originating from China grew 20-fold between 2005 and 2019, driven first by Hu Jintao's going out strategy and also now Xi Jinping's BRI. Despite that, China still falls behind investment in Southeast Asia, whose three largest sources of foreign direct investment are the EU, Japan, and the United States. So in the early stage between 2005 and 2010, China's investment profile in Southeast Asia was resting heavily on the energy sector. So we shouldn't think that energy investment in here is a novelty. Yeah. But most of its investment significantly diversified in scope in 2011 and 2019. The leading energy sector's average share in total Chinese investment in the region now still counted for about 37%, still higher than the infrastructure sector's share of about 31%. So in terms of BRI investment, I would assume that energy investment is still the big brother, even compared to the infrastructure. So as China accepted aggressive mitigation commitments, including carbon emissions peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060, the country's energy investment along the BRI started to prioritize low carbon energy projects with an increased strategic focus on Southeast Asia. So with instructions from Xi Jinping directly, I think those people who are engaged in overseas investment, they have to look more and more towards the low carbon sectors. So let's look at the hydropower. This is I think is something interesting because it belongs to both the conventional energy sector, but also the renewable energy. Yeah, even if it's some kind of environmentally controversial, but it's still low carbon. So China's early low carbon involvement in Southeast Asia includes its investment in the majority of hydropower projects in Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. This is China's starting point of energy investment in Southeast Asia. These governments have made hydropower expansion a priority of their energy policy and has made necessary rearrangements to attract foreign investors. So China grasped this opportunity, and between 2006 and 2011, Chinese investors such as the Export and Import Bank of China and China Development Bank, policy banks, financed 46% of all hydroelectricity capacity additions in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, and developed the previously untapped hydroelectric resources in countries bordering the Mekong and Irrawaddy river basins. So this investment represented 6% of the total global hydroelectric power capacity. So it's not a small proportion, 6% of the total global hydroelectric power capacity under construction at that time, and 10% of the planned capacity additions outside of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. China has emerged as a key player in both financing and building the hydroelectric power infrastructure in Southeast Asia. So also, I think we have to take into account that these days, for example, Laos is trying to become the battery of Southeast Asia. I don't know whether you've heard of this term or not. Yeah, you're using cell phone. You all know the importance of the battery for your cell phone. So Laos is trying to tap its hydropower resources, and even Singapore is importing now electricity from Laos. Not because Singapore lacks electricity, but because most of Singapore's electricity are from the fossil fuel, the burning of the natural gas. So they want to diversify to meet the climate edges. So if you import, so in the future, I think Singapore will import more and more electricity from neighboring countries like Laos or Indonesia to tap their renewable resources like hydropower, yeah, or wind power. So solar, wind, and clean coal. 1 minute? 2 minutes. Okay, so solar, wind, and clean coal. Yeah, so these are the yeah. So I don't want to read them, but actually you can see that between 2014 and 17, almost 3/4 of loans from major Chinese banks to the BI region's energy and transportation sectors went to the oil and gas and petrochemical industry. This was the previous situation. But now I think China is actually tilting its investment into the solar and the wind and even clean coal projects. So here I want to highlight a clean coal project in Indonesia, because we also mentioned this. Whether we have China has partnership with other countries. Actually, China does have a project about clean coal with Japanese company in developing the Tanjung Jati Power Station, Indonesia. Cleaning using clean coal technology featured with ultra supercritical boilers. So the project is very big. 5,800 megawatts. It's not a small project. So electric vehicles, I don't think I have time, but it seems that China is increasing EV investment in Thailand and Malaysia, especially. Yeah. So also, I think that for the building of the charging stations, companies like Huawei also, I think, yeah, trying to build more charging stations in some Southeast Asian countries. And we have to remember, China is actually the largest manufacturer, buyer, and exporter of EVs in this world. So they do have some kind of comparative advantages. So future trend, here I give you some of my evaluations. This is the last page. Competitiveness and challenges. Yeah, of course, there are certain competitiveness China has, for example, the geographic proximity and also the manufacturing power of certain renewable energy equipments. But also, I think they face fierce competition from other advanced economies like United States, European countries, or Japan, Korea. And more importantly, I think China's renewable energy investments in ASEAN actually will face intense competition. It can also be disrupted by domestic political jostling and shifting political economic priorities in these countries. So if you ask my attitudes towards this, I would say I would be cautiously optimistic about China's renewable energy investment in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
So Eric Frécon from École Navale will present a tentative typology of follow-ups in Chinese ports projects across Southeast Asia. He is based in Singapore as an adjunct fellow at IRASEC, IRSEM, and the French Naval Academy Sorbonne, where he taught from 2012 to 2018. He is also a visiting academic at the Université Brunei Darussalam, and he used to work as a lecturer at the Singapore University of Social Sciences during the COVID. Previously, he coordinated the Observatory on Southeast Asia within Asia Center, a very famous place to observe ASEAN current affairs in Paris. So Eric Frécon comes from political sciences and he has his diploma from Sciences Po Paris. So Eric is also an old friend, even if he looks young. And now it's his turn. Thank you, Eric, for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Elsa, for the very kind invitation, all the initiative you are taking for this network. It's a great pleasure to see you, friends, to listen to you, but also a great pressure because of all your very deep research. So I will try to give you and to share my 2 cents about another sector. Just before we had the 4 sectors, we try to zoom in. So now more about the port projects, so transport. So to go quickly, so of course you have familiar with the context right now in Indo-Pacific, in Southeast Asia, the bipolarization, feeling that we are all of us in think tank, or we're like soldiers in the south of steppe waiting for anything happening in the region. And actually, the genesis of this research, I mean, preliminary research, came from a seminar in France a few months ago, where people were talking about this Sino-Maritime globalization. So I was a bit puzzled by this idea, and especially the speculation, as you said, Prof, just before, about all this announcement about the port project funded by China, etc., versus the reality and the actual construction realization. So the idea was for me to try, at least to begin, to shed light not only on the failures of maybe all these port project developments, but on the gap between what is said, especially in my field, because I'm not an economist at all, so you will see it later, but in international relation versus all your research in depth on the field, especially in this sector in transport. So I was surprised the state of the art regarding Chinese investment in port is very poor. I mean, when I ask even expert, specialized journalists or prof in Singapore, what, nothing to share, and especially also in Indonesia, where sometimes I have opposite view. Yes, you have Chinese investment. Oh, no, you don't have anything. So quite challenging, but so stimulating as well. So one of the hypotheses is, yes, it's complex, and so it takes precisely, as you said, you wanted to link macro and meso levels, so maybe to link as well IR, international relation, and economy, anthropology, on this field. And maybe port has something specific, that's something I heard as well, part of sovereignty, and government are very careful when it's time to get external funding. So the starting point, to elaborate on it a bit, yes, you had fear and excitement as it happened in this seminar in France a few months ago, especially as you have now in China, indeed, so many arguments to feed, to nourish this idea about this investment coming, these tentacles in all the ports in Southeast Asia. So all these arguments you're familiar with, overcapacity in China, the ideology of Xi Jinping, François Gipoulou wrote on it in France, BRI since 2013, and also somebody recently talked to me about this non-nuclear propelled aircraft carrier in China, and they will need to fuel, to get fuel, and they cannot stay at sea for months, so that's why it will take to have some agreement, maybe for. So all these arguments, okay, because of that, it makes sense to talk about all this investment, plus some realization, the pipelines in Burma, yes, there is, all the railway diplomacy, and indeed, you have now a new, in Laos, Eric Motter wrote on it recently. And same at that moment, also in Southeast Asia, and indeed this, because a win-win approach by Xi Jinping, the speech in 2013 in Jakarta, yeah, it's a win for China, but also for Southeast Asia. So, okay, if you consider this, indeed, it makes sense to have all this investment in ports. Why? Because you have a demand for infrastructure in the Philippines, in Malaysia, for electoral reasons. No need to elaborate, but you're familiar with it. It also it mirrors the diplomatic vision or project in some countries. You have in the same time this global maritime fulcrum ID project in Indonesia. So we in China, we want to invest in port. You want to develop your port. So let's work together. Plus, you have all this personal connection. Lut is somebody you have to know in Indonesia, close relationship with China. Plus, he's thinking about his life after being a minister coordinating. So it's something to keep in mind. We anticipate. Then we saw Duterte, now the vice president in Philippines, but who was a mayor also in Davao, in Mindanao, and a lot of business over there. So just to illustrate, see all this article coming from Financial Times. Myanmar, mini Singapore, and with this Chinese media, yes, we confirm, yes, with Chinese support, Straits Times, same, some a port to rival Singapore. I mean, go to Batam, you will see. I mean, to rival Singapore. Plus, and indeed, with a Chinese merchant group to develop Batam, etc. Same, this Chinese firm in Bintan. Same, this island, northern Philippines, with a Chinese investments. Also, this former U.S. naval base in Subic Bay, yeah, you will have this Chinese investment, and also this base in Cambodia. Regularly, this think tank in USA provide actually very interesting data about this idea. So to sum up, see the map, which recall the the string of pearls. This idea, which was actually constructed by a US firm, and then after everybody used this idea, but with all these pearl or I don't know ports, which would be useful for China or Chinese Navy or whatever. So this is all the projects I mentioned earlier, but underlined are all those projects who are branded or labeled as a BRI project. So actually not so many, if you check or double check in the list of the BRI project. So this is a transition with my second part. So back to reality, go in the field to, as Singaporean would say, double confirm or not this investment. First, you can start with the immediate history, with the experience, the recent project, and already you have the three category. You have those who actually eventually nothing happened. This institute, this airport in Philippines, at the end of the day, nothing because the government said no or any other reason. Those projects where you have talk again and again, but nothing on the field. But they keep talking, yes, maybe, but nothing on the field. Or those where you have actually just a bit and very little. Yes, you have something, but very little. Guada in Pakistan, for example, almost nothing, but yes, it's there. And yes, you had some Chinese production, this light littoral mission ships in Malaysia, but actually not good quality, so almost a failure because Malaysia was a bit disappointed. And all these non-kept promises, for example, in Indonesia. So Bruno Jota and colleague work on Batota in Sri Lanka. Plus, you have another list of possible sources. I mentioned this list of BRI, so starting point to see if yes or no, you have to take it seriously. MDA is something, so Benjamin will work on it. Maritime Domain Awareness. This is maybe one of the main takeaways for today, but it's something you can use, and we will use it later to see if yes or not you have maritime traffic and in the port. So this is the first thing to do to check or not. This is the people I interviewed for today, all these association shipping port authorities. But sometimes it was a bit disappointed because even then I had no clue. But those authorities in some ports, yes, because they knew, and some other, and this China Global Investment Tracker, very useful as well. So I use this picture most of the time, but to say that yes, there is what you see. That way, if you go to Java, if you want to appreciate what I'm putting, better to go behind the curtain to see the reality, which is a bit different. So that's what we should do. And the result is, as I said, first you have a list of port projects where eventually nothing happened. In Fuga, excitement because it's close to Taiwan. Yes, it makes sense. They could use the facilities for the PLA, the People Liberation Army, but eventually no. Subic Bay, same. The government said, hey, don't come here on this shipyard because it's too much sensitive. So eventually nothing. Tanjung Sao is in Indonesia, the one what to rival, to compete with Singapore. But so you can see Tanjung Sao. Actually, you have almost nothing. There is an anchorage, like a waiting room before going to Singapore, but nothing. A friend of mine who is there, so I have friends there living there, so they can see. They open the window and they see. They say there is nothing. Just they are started to build a bridge, but nothing else. You have some other project to keep in mind, Tanjung Pinggir, Tanjung Karat. Recently, Luhut said, yes, let's work on it. So we will see later. Kijang is interesting because there was like a no-go zone for non-Chinese people in Bintan. But at the end of the day, Chinese worker went back home, and there is nothing about port facilities or what. It's more a factory actually. But as you can see, you don't have Tanjung Sao in the list of the BRI project, but you have Kuala Tanjung, which is one where, again, the second category, we keep talking, but nothing happened. And here is Kuala Tanjung. So this is a tool I mentioned for marine traffic, but you have also Sea Vision by the USA. You have Unseen Labs by a French company to track the AIS, automatic identification system, on every ship. So very useful to see if yes or not you have a business or not activity. And plus you can click on the port and you can see desaline ports. The day I used in the last week, 6. So me too, I had my secondary teacher told me that no need to know the exact data, but better to know the rough estimate. So I check on the well and the MRT. Today in Le Havre, which is twice smaller than the 30th 30 port in the world. Le Havre, the French port, very small. Today you have 95 vessels in port, and Tanjung Priok in Jakarta, which is 24, you have 195. So see Kuala Tanjung 6. And then you have a third category with all these ports. You have something, but very little. Muara Besar, I've been in Brunei last year. Fascinating experience. You have this island in the middle of the bay, 3 factories. And indeed, you can have traffic, but I feel that China reached the limits, and that now, even if I use a word of public civil society in Brunei, I don't know, but I feel that the Sultan cannot go further in terms of partnership with China. Malaysia, please read this book chapter by Francis Hutchinson and his colleague, where he focused on the Malacca Gateway. There is a presentation online actually, and all these impediments to develop the business over there. And then you have Cambodia and in Myanmar. Cambodia, we have our 2 experts, Antonin Morin and his friend, so working on it, but we share. We have WhatsApp diplomacy, but we have also now WhatsApp research. We share view, and so he was not that concerned. And Barrett Chung, who is living in Singapore and Cambodia as well, president of Asia Vision Institute, confirmed that based on the constitution, do not expect anything, any Chinese base or what over there. He was more talking about the US narrative on this issue. And I don't know how to pronounce this port in Myanmar. Same, you remember Financial Times talking about the new Singapore, 3 desaline ports. And as you can see, I mean, I didn't manage to get the exact date of the picture, but yeah, I mean, nothing to do with Keppel Harbor or what in Singapore. But same, I asked for Somalia Renault, very good, who said, of course, Burma is too busy with what happened now. China tried just to secure what they're doing now before, instead of developing new projects. And Kinwin, who actually was trained in the Lee School of Public Policy, now there is an institute in Burma. Same, nothing to. I think they said there is a new survey starting soon. So to sum up, here is now on the map with a different color category. You can see the only 2 projects listed by the China Global Investment Tracker, so only 2. In Indonesia, it was not so clear. I saw something related to shipping and transport, but because people told me that in Kuala Tanjung, for sure, I got the news from the head of the port, there was no Chinese investment, and there are talk. They came before the COVID to see the place. There is still talk with a Dutch company as well. So just maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes to conclude. So why is such a gap? You have explanation in China, where depending on who are exactly the actor. That's why I enjoyed the presentation yesterday of the minds, whether yes or no it's highly coordinated or not. In China, you have so many other projects which are not maritime one, and we don't know whether it's for domestic and economic purposes or strategic and military. This is not so clear, and this depends precisely on the centralization or not. You have explanation in Southeast Asia as well to explain, because for diplomatic reason, maybe it's time also for Southeast Asia country to take distance, to move away a bit from China. You have also some local Chinese communities who are a bit concerned because they feel bad between this Chinese presence and their efforts to be part of the national community. So especially, for example, in Malaysia, and some other are a bit tired by this Chinese interference. Sometimes you have this Chinese ambassador coming, giving advice, part of demonstrations. At the local level, this is very interesting because you have also competition, rivalry. I talked to you about Luwood, who try to have business with China in Kuala Tanjung, but you have BP Batam, who try to get money from Emirati people. So what to do? And actually, they are fighting between each other. Or you have also this idea of investment coalition. Alvin Chamba, I think you work a lot on this issue, talk about that, all these different actors. You need them as a Chinese to have business, but sometimes they can also control you. I mean, they take the lead because they know the place. And also you have this possible criminal opposition. I got this article about Philippines, where the NPA, New People Army, wanted to target all the Chinese projects for ideological. But maybe the main takeaway to explain not only the failures, I told you because of Chinese reason or Southeast Asian factors, but also you have this idea of securitization. When you make something economic, it's an economic issue, okay, business, and you make it as a security issue, and then it starts from the elite to go to the public mindset via the media, and instead of being a non-politicized issue, just business, or maybe a politicized issue, okay, then it became a securitized issue. I know we have a French audience, that's why I mentioned a knock, knock the drug. When you have this doctor coming in the village, and everybody is good health, no problem for anybody, so very bad for his business. So he tried to convince people that they are sick. So this is the idea to fabrication de l'ennemi, to create an enemy. I need an enemy. So this is something we have to keep in mind. And still, we have some reason to qualify the above mentioned gap and not to bring nuances, because okay, maybe you don't have any Chinese port or proper funding, but maybe you have just agreement, and there is between a port in China and Singapore. Maybe you don't have any port, but maybe just a facility. What about the undersea cables? Talking about maritime security, we have to get a broader scope, view, because we have cases of espionage or what. What about the undersea cartography, hydrography, critical for the Chinese submarine? And you have more and more research from China in the Southeast Asia. What about the smart ports? We know that especially in Indonesia, China pushed for smart ports. So, and then after you have maybe a cyber issue on cyber security. And sometimes you have monotask ports, meaning, for example, in Davao, direct link between the port close to the mine, actually, straight to China. So let's take it in mind. So last slide, and of course, temporary conclusion, because it's quite frustrating. I would love to go deeper on this issue. But so far, I don't think that there is any maritime sino-globalization with any hegemonic goals. We agreed on this issue with Paul Touret, French economist on shipping, who was part of the seminar, French seminar I mentioned. That said, no reason to lower the guard, or in more neutral terms, no reason not to survey and to monitor the activity, and that's why MDA again, and this will be mentioned as PhD's topic, in Indonesia as well, vessel transit system to survey the traffic in the strait. What about the Congress? Because we are talking about China, but I'm not an expert in China, but I feel that we have to wait for the Congress. Especially this morning, there was an article about this UOA, who maybe can be retired, and he's the one, as Prof. Boyer said, who are highly coordinated, who takes the lead, but what after his retirement? And if I may just translate this in international relations field, and as I said, to link research, maybe this is a takeaway. We wrote an article with Delphine Alès, Prof. Alès, on BRI and in Indonesia, and our idea was to focus on misperception, and this is the idea, the misperception between the speculation. This is the word we used, Prof, before, all this discourse and the reality. Securitization, because I mentioned all maybe not sport, but other initiative. So will it be real, or is it the start for a new round of remorse and securitization? I don't know. And in terms of diplomacy, what about the translation hedging, meaning my egg in different basket, in the US basket, in the Chinese basket, or a third path? We know this is what France tries to promote between China and the USA. And because I keep an eye on it, Pacific Ocean is a fascinating field as well, and with exactly the same issue over there. So sorry.
Thank you very much.
First topic is the RCEP implication for China's FDI in Southeast Asia by Dr. Tuan Yuen, my colleague from East Asian Institute. And I don't want to mention too much about the importance of the RCEP, as it's now already becoming the world's largest free trade area. So if India were included, it would be even much larger. So without further ado, Mariette, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chen for introductions. And my presentation today is focused on the asset perspective for the China FDI in Southeast Asia. And the content of my presentation focus on three aspects. First is the development from the ASEAN-China FTA to the asset. And I think the more important thing is what's the difference between the asset and also the ASEAN-China FTA, especially for the investments. And finally, because now asset is a very important like for the China, there are a lot of the campaign for this, so I can found some materials to see what the China perspective on this FDI to asset. Actually, the ASEAN-China's economic relations since 2002, there's signed a framework agreement on the comprehensive economic cooperations. So after that, they have an agreement on trade in goods and agreement trade in service, and also the investment agreement in the following years. This agreement actually provide a legal basis for them to create a ASEAN-China free trade area by the 2010, and this also already updated in 2014. For the asset, as you know, that already concluded in 2020, and also already into force in the beginning of this year. And the signals of this joint commitment, including they are very big, including 15 countries in the Asia and the Pacific region, and it included the advanced and developing country. And the more important thing, the coverage is roughly we say that 1/3 of the world total population in output and also trade. So it could be considered as a more comprehensive regional agreement compared to the previous one, and it is also an upgrading agreement of the 5 now existing ASEAN +1 FTAs. So what's the difference between the RCEP and ASEAN-China FTA? The both agreement actually is including the fundamentals policy, including the trade in goods, rule of original, and also trade in service, investment, and disputes settlements. But they also have some policy, including the movement of the natural persons and also intellectual property competition. And this one chapter in the RCEP is very more detailed, but there's just maybe one sentences or one article in the agreements of the ASEAN-China FTA. But there are also some new chapters, including the e-commerce, and also the focus on the small and medium enterprise, and they also encourage for the economic and technical cooperation. This is a new thing. They are not mentioned in the previous ASEAN-China free trade agreement. And so the more interesting is what is foreign investment may concern that is from the RCEP. Maybe they are concerned about whether the investment field is restricted by the host country, and whether they need some requirement for the equity ratio, or also the senior management personnel, and also whether they have some obligation for the performance requirement. It is something the foreign investor may concern about their investments in Southeast Asia. So what is the changes related to FDI in the RCEP? The first changes, I think the more important is chapter 10 about the investments. In general, actually you can find it's more open than the existing ASEAN +1 FTA. And there are some articles, also a new one. For example, the prohibition of the performance requirement. Actually, this one is it can better let the investor better choose their cooperation structures based on their development goals. And also the article for the senior management and board of directors. This is also a new article. They are not in the previous years. They simply say this is already uplisted the restriction for the management structure for foreign investors. So they can easily to let their own senior manager of their to control their foreign investment in Southeast Asia. I think the second changes and the more important is they already had a negative list. This is put in the annex. Now all the ASEAN members already adopt negative list matters in 5 non-service sectors, including the manufacturing, fishery, agriculture, forest, and mining. And for the service sector, they also now half of the country already commit to adopt the negative list within 6 years, and others they also commit to change to negative list by 15 years. So in general, apart from the low-income ASEAN countries such as Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, others ASEAN countries already commit open more than 100 sector for the FDI. The level is higher than the ASEAN China FTA. The third one is already have some annex to liberalize the service sector. They encourage for the financial service, telecommunication service, and provision service. They have some article that permit the institute to establish their investment for this member country. And the fourth point is just now I already highlighted so there's some new chapter. Actually, they export the FDI in China. For example, the e-commerce. There's some articles to regulate the cross-border e-commerce, and also that also will encourage Chinese overseas inventory investments. This is one also you can find in the China official document. And also they will encourage more SME and private foreign investors, like just you highlighted. Then maybe have some new private small Chinese investor to the Southeast Asia. I think for the China investment in ASEAN is still moderate. They're not so big in compared to others, but in largest in couple years because of the EAI. And also from previous speakers also highlighted that China mainly invested in the infrastructure related sector, including the energy, transport, and also the metal industry. No matter you see the investment value or the number of the project. So, what is now the Chinese perspective on the FDI in Southeast Asia after the ASEAN? As I say, since the beginning of this year, the agreement already taken into force. There, if I remember, it's not wrong. There are already 4 seasons for they organized by the Ministry of Commerce. They have some direction for the foreign investor, outward foreign investor, to how to invest in Southeast Asia through the ASEAN. There are a lot of the propaganda material there. So from here, what they have highlighted is some of the industry. For example, the light industry, the Clement highlighted that this is something maybe will have a lot of industry will move to Southeast Asia. Actually, they have not the same the reason. Some of them is highlighted from the analysis framework or both years, and some is actually they consider, for example, the automobile industry, and this week is more is focused on the local market. Now, actually, before the ASEAN already has some existing enterprise such as Chile in Malaysia, Great Wall model in Thailand. So they will extract more Chinese partner along the supply chain to invest in Southeast Asia through the ASEAN, because now through the ASEAN is more liberal and they can use their resource from the China to invest in China in Southeast Asia. For example, they use their own personnel. And also just now highlighted the agriculture industry. This is I think it's one new thing maybe the China will push forward, because it is in Southeast Asia, there is a very agriculture is very important for some of the ASEAN countries. So previously, it's very restricted for the foreign investor to invest in this area. So what is the implication that from the China's documents? Actually, I think ASEC enhanced trend. Just now a lot of speakers highlighted the low and middle end, and also the labor intensive in industry is moving out from China to Southeast Asia. The second is ASEC facilitate China enterprise in ways I think Southeast Asia for the market expansion, such as just now the automotive industry. And another important aspect is ASEC strengthen the China investment model, because as you know, China's model, they may be will invest in Southeast Asia. They will bring their own labor worker. They will use their own resource from the domestic. Actually, previous they have a lot of restriction. They invest in Malaysia, also in Thailand. They face a lot of the issue there. But now, because of just now some new articles there may be more liberal to do their China style investment. And the last one is, I think ASEC expand the China industry influence from manufacturing to agriculture. And actually, the just now they had highlighted one. Now, because the ASEC, Thailand already canceled the FDI restriction for the rice and for the livestock. Vietnam also canceled the FDI restriction for some aquatic production process. And also Indonesia allows the foreign investor jointly invest in the coconut processing. So in Malaysia, you can see now some of the Chinese enterprise invest in the durian. And in Indonesia, you also can see some Chinese company, they invest in the palm oil processing. So I think the next step of my this study, I think is two things. First is we need more data collection to adapt to examine what the argument generate from the ASEC comparison and also the Chinese official documents. Another thing is in this morning we actually another aspect we did not discuss in here is about the Korea, Japan. What is the impact? Because they are one of the members of the ASEC, what's their impact for the China FDI in the Southeast Asia? It is competitor or they can cooperation or other else? This is one aspect maybe need to push forward in the future work. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Aymeric Mariette from the University of Paris.
Hi everyone. So today the role of finishing off the audience belongs to me, yes. With a quite heavy topic. So I'll present today China's overseas special economic zones in Southeast Asia. So the aim of this presentation is to show that behind this generic term of overseas special economic zones in Southeast Asia lies a variety of names, actors, and interests, part of forming a uniform strategy. So this presentation does not seek to be exhaustive, but rather to push forward some hypotheses about the actor strategies in this mechanism, Chinese and local ones. So as the overseas special economic zones in Southeast Asia are the main driving force of these zones are the Chinese actors, this presentation will mainly focus on the Chinese perspective. They also try to add some common elements about the local perspective, even though it's quite difficult because there are as many local perspectives as there are countries in Southeast Asia and even regions. But combining both perspectives is very important to get a good understanding of how this zone works, and also to understand how to understand the difference between the strategies of the Chinese actors in implementing these zones and the reality on the ground. So my presentation is mainly based on reports from international institutions, academic articles, also data collected on the website of different Chinese central administration and agencies. And also I collected more precise data on the Kuantan Industrial Park in Malaysia and the Sihanoukville Special Economic Zone in Cambodia, and especially on the Sihanoukville Special Economic Zone, as I just spent 2 months doing field work in Cambodia. So some assumptions I might make today could be a bit biased by the institutional context of Cambodia, which is very specific, especially regarding its relations to China. So first, to get an overview. So since the 1919, the authorities of many Southeast Asian countries have been developing in cooperation with Chinese companies special economic zones, which are delimited geographical areas offering regimes and regulatory frameworks that differ from the rest of the country in order to attract companies and foreign investments. According to the Chinese central government, these overseas SEZs can take different names. So according to the government, Chinese companies that mainly develop overseas economic and trade cooperation zones, overseas industrial parks, as well as overseas agricultural cooperation demonstration zone. These zones can also take different typical forms, and most often a combination of typical forms. So the first situation is where an overseas special economic zone is developed by a private Chinese developer with a local alone or with a local partner. The second situation is a zone being developed through public-private partnerships between a private Chinese company and a local public and or private actor. And the third situation is a zone being developed through intergovernmental partnership between the local and national authorities of the country where the zone is being developed and their Chinese counterparts. So now, according to the Chinese official data, we have now 37 overseas SEZs in Southeast Asia. So you can see on the map that Indonesia, for example, had the largest number of these zones in the region. But this figure, 37 overseas SEZs in the region, only accounts for part of the reality, as we know that provinces in China, they also have their own lists of overseas special economic zones developed in the region. And it's also highly likely that not most, but a lot of zones are being developed by Chinese companies in the region without any cooperation with local authorities or local national authorities in China. So these Chinese overseas SEZs in Southeast Asia cover different economic sectors, mainly manufacturing, agriculture, and minerals. And roughly 70% of these overseas SEZs in the region concern the manufacturing sector. And when it comes to the overseas SEZs in the manufacturing sector, which interests me the most for my research, so they concentrate important logistic capacities, as they're mainly located on border and coastal areas. And the main Chinese provinces from which the Chinese companies involved in developing these zones in Southeast Asia originate are so Shandong, Zhejiang, and Guangxi. And you can see from this map here that
you can see from this map that most of all the companies from Poitiers province involved in implementing these overseas SEZs in Southeast Asia are public companies, whereas in the case of Zhejiang, they are mostly private. So that suggests an important political dimension for this mechanism for some of the provinces in China. So from this brief, needs to be said that a big majority of the zones are being developed by private Chinese companies and not public ones in Southeast Asia. So from this overview, we can see that these special economic zones involve a lot of actors and strategies, and now we'll try to make some assumptions on what could be these strategies. So first, the Chinese companies. So they're the main actors in implementing these zones abroad. And initially, they're the first one. They're the one who initiated this in the 1990s. So here the question is to know what would push these Chinese companies to choose overseas special economic zones as a means of establishment abroad compared to more standard ones. So the first assumption would be that it would be a way for these companies to host their suppliers and improve supply chain efficiency. And indeed, all these zones are located as associated with an important transportation hub and mainly ports. It could also be a mean for Chinese developer of real estate and industrial parks in China to conquer international markets. And indeed, many zones in Southeast Asia are being developed by Chinese companies which are already operating special economic zone and industrial parks in the province of origin in China. That is the case for the two zones I'm studying, the Sihanoukville Special Economic Zone and the Kuantan Industrial Park in Malaysia. These zones also considered a way for the Chinese companies to strengthen their international competitiveness, of course, through the preferential policies they enjoy inside this special economic zone, so mainly in terms of tax and custom. But what's more interesting is it seems to be for some Chinese companies a way to replicate abroad their provincial industrial cluster. For example, if we look at the Sihanoukville Special Economic Zone, so it's being developed by the Chinese textile conglomerate, so the Hongdou Group. When the Hongdou Group developed and established the zone in Sihanoukville, it was followed by many of its suppliers and logistic partners from its province of origin in Jiangsu. So when the zone started operation, I think it was 2012, 80% of the companies which were registered in the zone were already working with Hongdou in Jiangsu in China. And beyond replicating their Chinese business environments, an hypothesis here would be that these overseas special economic zones constitute an institutional transformation tool for the Chinese companies involved. That means a way for the companies to change the institutions and the rules locally in a way that it will better fit its own interests. And that leads to the domestic policy approach in the international political economy, for which the domestic institutional environment of a firm constitutes a comparative advantage that you will try to keep when venturing abroad. So again, going back to the Sihanoukville Special, it hosts different training institutes, for example, inside. And these training institutes teach local workers, not only on production matters, skills, but also, of course, on Chinese language, but also on the way they should behave with the management of the factories. So we can see here how these zones can constitute a way to influence norms at the local level. And also these zones, and especially the Sihanoukville Special Economic Zone, they barely allow unions inside. And at least in Cambodia, they don't allow independent unions. And as the president of a union federation in Cambodia told me, the special economic zones in Cambodia, but especially the Sihanoukville one, have been the starting point in the country to strengthen the government-allied unions to in their capacity to attract workers compared to the independent union. So now, looking at the Chinese central authorities. So the Chinese central authorities in this process, they originally took backseat, but now they're playing a major role. So they've published their first policy paper in 2006. So back then, overseas economic and trade cooperation zones were to be part of the national strategy go-out policy in order to promote the Chinese investment growth. It's also seen as a way for central authorities to avoid trade barriers. That is the case for the Sud-Est Special Economic Zone and the Kuantan Industrial Park. So, for example, in the Kuantan Industrial Park, the main and still only active investor in the zone is Alliance Steel, and it settled actually in the zone following the new trade tariff that were imposed by EU and the US on the steel coming from China. It's also seen as a way for Chinese central authorities to create economies of scale for Chinese overseas investment, and especially in assisting small and medium enterprises in China in venturing overseas. And in general, it's seen as a way to strengthen solidarity between Chinese firms when they go abroad. Another important element is that these zones also allow developing countries to replicate Chinese development experience and the success of the special economic zone in China. So that is the case, for example, in Sihanoukville, where the authorities they really look at Shenzhen, the special economic zone, and they're actually now working on a new development plan in the city in collaboration with the Shenzhen Urban Planning Institute. And since 2013, these zones are being part of course, the new so-called strategy. And so as part of a large network of road and port infrastructure, they act as economic vectors, economic and commercial cooperation vectors between the country members of the Belt and Road Initiative. And indeed, if we look at the Chinese statistics, most of these zones are now being recorded as parks along the Belt and Road. Now, looking at the Chinese active strategy, the local authorities, Chinese local authorities, sorry. So, reflecting the general link between the local authorities and the national authorities in China, Chinese local authorities seems to act as an intermediate between the strategies of the firms and the strategies of the central authorities. So local authorities in China, they lobby the interests of the firms in front of the Chinese national government, but they also implement at the local level policy guidelines from Beijing, and thus they push for their companies to get in line with the Chinese central government objective. But Chinese local authorities, and especially Chinese provinces authorities, they also develop their own international strategies. So, for example, the Guangxi province is developing since 2006, or don't remember, a strategy to locate itself as a key trade hub between Chinese Western provinces and different countries and the countries in Southeast Asia. And zones such as the Kuantan Industrial Park is actually part of that strategy. And the developer of this industrial park, the Beibu Port Beibu Port Group, is also investing in also special economic zone in different Southeast Asian countries such as Cambodia, in Indonesia, for example. As I've only got 1 minute left, I think I'll just skip the local active strategies. And so, yeah, maybe to conclude. So on this last slide, I tried to articulate the institutional advantage
brought to the Chinese companies by the institutional framework that goes along with the implementation of overseas economic and trade cooperation zones. And this important structural cooperation framework seems to bring additional stability for the Chinese companies involved in implementing the zone. And this is all the most necessary that the investment needed to develop these other infrastructures is very significant. And going back to the domestic policy approach in the international political economy, this structural framework could also be seen as a way to support the strategies of institutional transformation at the local level that is being pursued by Chinese companies in implementing these zones. For example, the Chinese developers, they know they can rely on especially their provincial authorities in China to invite a lot of local officials in China to provide a lot of training. For example, the local authorities in Sihanoukville, they regularly go to China where they receive training on local development policies. So all this institutional framework that support the special economic zone is also something to have in mind to understand the logic and the strategies, the actors. I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Aymeric. So questions, please. Okay, please.
Yeah, I got a question to you, Aymeric, and actually also to some of the others. You've been talking about ministries, about local governments, and all of that, and that is obviously really important in the relationship, for instance, China and the special economic zones. But I'm particularly myself always in what the Communist Party does, because the Communist Party is very active also in my research in party building in these special economic zones. But also in foreign investment companies. But I don't hear anything about that in your presentation. So it's not only you, but also several of the others. So I just was wondering whether you have any evidence or indications from your research of the involvement of party or party building activities. Very general question. If you say no, that's fine.
What I would say is that Communist Party is a bit everywhere. Looking at the different actors, obviously they are members of the Chinese Communist Party, and I guess they'll join common activities organized by the Communist parties. And when it comes to I guess they might have a role more as an association and coordination between all these different actors. But so far in my research, I didn't see specifically the names on any actors.
Well, that's also important information. The absence of information is also important.
The Chinese form of the special economic zone started with lots of policy concessions to investors in those zones. Is there any notion of that in the special economic zones in ASEAN countries sponsored by China? You mentioned the union thing, but is there anything else?
I mean, in terms of practical policy inside,
as in tax concessions or
so that really differs from one country to another, because most of the countries in Southeast Asia, they have their own SEZ law. So they will decide, okay, if you implement an SEZ, that these are the advantage that you can offer to the companies which will settle inside. So it will vary from the country to another, but the law is not very helpful. I mean, it has its own limits at some point. For example, there's no in Cambodia, the law doesn't say that unions shouldn't be allowed. They say that when it comes to labor norms, the labor law should be the same inside the zone and outside the zone. But this special organization of the zone makes it difficult for union established outside to get inside the zone. So even though the law says, okay, it's the same,
inside the zone, you have a special organization effect that leads to different norms.
Ask Sarah, please.
I was the last one still fresh in the memory. So I have one comment and two short questions. The comment is when you compare the investors from Guangxi and Zhejiang, you mentioned this reflective strategy different, and I agree that in the Guangxi's case, the local government act like they are frontier of the foreign minister, so they're trying to have some. So it's quite normal. It's quite understandable. But in the case of Zhejiang, it already have a very vibrant non-state sector, and that also reflects the domestic economic structure of different localities. So that's the comment. The question number one is, do you see, because as I mentioned this morning, that there's also an attempt of joint work in the third market. Do you see special zones that was jointly built up between China, local, and the third party? For example, China, Singapore. So question number one. Question number two, before I forgot, you mentioned about two waves. One is 2006, the zones, and then 2013. So in your field research, do you see any kind of difference in different time, the zones that was set up or started in a different time frame? Do they have anything different? One is the cooperation, and then the BRI kind of zones, as you mentioned, 2 times. So that's my second.
So the first question, that's indeed a good point. I'm not sure if Chinese companies that are developing, for example, especially economic zone with the Singaporean actors, but I would not be surprised. I think they recently passed, for example, an agreement with Hong Kong to develop special economic zones abroad. So that's, I guess that's.
Singapore?
I'm not sure about something, maybe because.
I remember some time ago we visited a place, it's sort of in the border area, as you mentioned, a border of 3 countries, and that special zone, some kind of zone. I can't remember, just wondering if you encountered something like that. But that's okay.
I can't remember. I don't think so, but I would not be surprised because China was in its way. It's now implementing overseas special economic zone abroad. It was really influenced by the first overseas special economic zone in China, which was a Singaporean zone.
Yes.
The Sud-Est.
But that's actually interesting because Singapore manages a number of special economic zones in the region. So,
right.
And the question is, would Chinese investors also go to those zones rather than to the Chinese special economic zone?
That's a very good question indeed. So far, I don't see Singapore in the picture itself. I mean, in the Chinese overseas, but I've not looked deep into all these. And for the second question, that was regarding the evolution in China. So I think they insist with the BRI strategy, they insist more and more on infrastructure. For example, the Guangxi province, the way they build these industrial parks is it's an integrated strategy between the infrastructure, the port, and the zone which will host all the suppliers and increase the logistic efficiency. It's kind of a.
I think Sri Lanka is also did something like that, the port and then the zones in Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka?
I vaguely remember something. Yeah, that's all.
I have a question to Aymeric and Aymeric. I was hearing you thinking an homology between special zone and ports as a way of getting autonomy for capital from domestic institutions. Don't you perceive something common, tinkering with the governance model? And I have a question for China is so advanced in returns to run solar panel and so on, that de facto you cannot conceive in Europe a self-fulfilling green economy because everything goes to China. So you comfort competitiveness of China, but at the cost of all other countries depending from the supply.
Yeah.
So you have a new supply dependency due because I'm studying Denmark and so on. Denmark be out because you don't have inclusive water. So here you have a new threat in the fact the green economy equipment will be in large part Chinese. And so when you compare this all over the world, I see new contradiction. So, so one point.
Would agree. Yeah. Well, I don't have time to elaborate on this. First, I think the solar panel, for example, is facing a shortage. Yeah, as you mentioned, not only because the demand from this region, but also because of the chip, the silicon problem or other material supply issues. Also, I think China, but to solve this problem, I think China now is also moving production line of solar panels from China to Southeast Asia. I also don't have time. I included in my slides. Yeah, Malaysia in the very beginning, since 2011, because that year also was the year when EU and US was imposing anti-subsidy tariffs against Chinese solar panels. If you still remember, it was a big deal, like 200 billion US dollar was involved. So since that time, China in the beginning moved the production line first to Malaysia, and now increasingly to Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand as well. So the industrial parks, actually, you mentioned that actually many solar panel production lines are also located in some of the industrial parks, like the Thailand Royal Industrial Park you mentioned, and also Guangdong as well. So Southeast Asia is now emerging as a new solar panel manufacturer for the whole world. Yeah.
So the blame should not be to China, but to others, no?
Yes.
Like in Japanese delocalization.
Yeah.
So the blame will be to others.
Up to now, no blame to this region. Yeah. You look at the US, they remove the restrictions upon the solar panel from this region, but still not from China. Yeah, the very recent announcement. Yeah.
The first question, Professor Poirier's first question.
Homology between ports and special zones.
No, but quick answer, and then after you can complete. But no, indeed, most of the time it works together because
because I was thinking they are mixed together. You put a port nearby,
and then
so
after
you have to join them. You don't put port on desert. So this is what I was thinking. You should link, then both.
Yeah, and because you have it works together in Kuala Tanjung, for example, you have this port, but a few kilometers away you have a special economic zone. And the gentleman I interviewed, precisely previously was working in the port, and now he moved to the special economic zone. In Bintan, you have all these special economic zone, Batam, Bintan, Karimun, etc. And together with this project, so not yet, but still it's around. And in Burma as well, we should double check, but I think Burma is the same in QQ. We have also a special economic zone. The trouble in Burma is on standby mode because of the event over there, but this is still in the mind. So we should, it will take a beautiful map and then to see, but I think it makes sense because of the need for natural resources, the need to, and the same in Davao. I don't know, but in Davao you have ports with Chinese company, and you have a lot of Chinese business in Davao, not only in the port but also in energy, etc. So precisely and straight to South.
I'll just add to that. It is.
There's a question from the audience.
2 seconds. It's interesting because in Senegal, Chinese they don't own the port. It's owned by Japanese. I mean, Chinese is the Japanese is the main investor. So, and you could see that they're a bit upset with that because it prevents them to have this comprehensive strategy which they're looking for, obviously, implementing this special organization. So competition.
Well played.
Yeah, we have 2 questions from Kristen to Eric. Any evidence of China maritime safety regulations or standards being used in Southeast Asian ports? Does the China Maritime Safety Authority play any role in the investment and construction of port infrastructure or its use? I'm thinking about China rules for China ships, enterprises, personnel, and extended into onshore port operations. Second one, any evidence or speculation on port labor cooperation with Chinese firms? Stevedores and other onshore personnel always employed under local conditions, or are there some great institutional areas of onshore personnel employed by Chinese firms under the foreign labor cooperation system?
More than 2 questions.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, no, but actually, please forward me the question, and then because I will forward the question to my friend over there. I have no clue, but actually, I do not think so. Precisely because it appeared to me that this port issue was a very sensitive issue for national government, and they tried to take over, and they failed the threat for a while, and so now they are very careful and they try to stimulate. That's what Philippine port authorities told me, and even in Indonesia as well. So we should double check. So in terms of norms, which is also the key issue in your project, I do not see. I didn't see anything like that. And then port level cooperation with China firm. No, there was this. Cooperation with this area in Bintan, east of Bintan, but eventually nothing to do with the proper port. It's more industrial, like an industrial park. So no clue as well about that. But indeed, I should go deeper. So thank you a lot. Thanks a lot for the question.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you, and sorry for.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Can I have one? Sorry, there's a question in the back, but you need to come to the table, because otherwise you can talk on the mic.
No, I think just when Aymeric was answering a question before about the Singapore participation to Chinese special economic zone. I think I remember that when China and Singapore started enriching the relations under Deng Xiaoping, that Singapore authorities have been assisting China to modernize its civil service on the one hand, but on the other hand, they also helped framing the first layer of special economic zones in the China's coastal area, which actors may have served as a model for the rest. And I think that you referred to a special economic zone between at the border between 2 countries. Was it not between Laos and Vietnam, this former casino city that they want to rebrand as economic hub?
It's the whole triangle special economic zone.
Yeah. It's somewhere in the
Between Laos, Thailand.
Yeah. Oh, it happened
And
in
that
I don't know what kind of zone. It's a special zone, whether it's industrial or
it's more about it used to be tourism casinos, but it didn't work, and they are rebranding it as industrial estate. They are clearing the land on very wide areas to build factories at the border.
So right now they're coming into
Exactly.
Among 3 countries.
2 at least, but there's Laos. I'm sure about Laos. I'm not sure about the.
I'm not sure about the evolution, but at first it was more like tourism.
That's why we're there for tourism. We were tourists at a time.
I find it interesting what Eric just said, that a lot of the countries have become more careful with ports, and frankly, of course, the Hambantota port is one of these the poster childs of how not to do it. But one of the problems I see is that because a lot of decisions are quite decentralized. I mean, you say there's a list of BRI projects, but I don't know what that list means. But if individual provinces or even individual state enterprises link up with different local authorities in ASEAN countries, there's an adding up problem. Hambantota is actually a real good example for it, because When I was still working with the World Bank, we calculated the net economic value of that port, and it's zero. It's literally, it doesn't mean that you can't make money. It does, and that's the problem. It doesn't mean that you can't make money. Like Shanghai's port is actually net value zero. It should be Ningbo. But because Shanghai says, okay, well, no, we still want a port, so we move the port away from the center. We build an island and have a new port and tell every company in Shanghai to use that port. Then you still have a financial model. But in Hamburg that doesn't work because you don't have anybody to direct. And that's why the net value of zero translates into a big financial loss as well, not in Shanghai. But I see that is, I think now a lot of people are quite afraid of making the Hongkong total mistake. So I think there's less appetite for very big investments. What's outstanding is the Lao train, of course, which is another one of the very big ones, with enormous investments in that train through Laos. And the question is whether that will be economically and financially viable, even though the structuring of that piece of infrastructure is actually not so bad. I mean, there's a lot of risk where it should be on China, i.e. on China. So, but anyway. So I think those are interesting for those big infrastructure pieces. It's actually really interesting that coordination problem where the central authorities in China don't have enough of a coordination role. They just like to add to the list of $1,000 projects without assessing whether those projects are viable or not.
Was there a final question on the screen? Which is the top one?
Go ahead, you're the chair. You're the chair.
How concerned are ASEAN governments about any deterioration in their trade balance with China, especially after ASEAN? And how do they plan to improve their situation? I assume this question goes to Yuen. You talk about ASEAN.
Even though we do not focus on ASEAN governments on these seminars, but I think for this question after ASEP, and now most of the ASEAN country now is trying to adjust their practice and their mechanism to use the ASEP, especially for the rule of origin. I saw from Malaysia, from Singapore, also from Indonesia, there are a lot of the seminar conference to consider this, because through the rule of the origin, actually extract a lot of the foreign investment from the outside. This is most of the study already mentioned it. So, but what is they will invest to Malaysia or to other places? This is something maybe we need to dig more into this issue.
Well, I can give you the economist answer is you can't at the same time like foreign investment and do not like trade deficits, because it's actually the flip side. So, if you say, well, we want a lot of investment from China, that's great, but then a lot of material comes from China and you run a trade deficit, which is financed by that capital inflow. So that's a definition. From a more practical point of view, I actually think that this increasing integration in the region, which has already been going on for 20 years, but that gets reinforced by RCEP. And I think people seem to be quite comfortable with that arrangement. And, in the end, China is the final assembly point. A lot of intermediaries goes to China, but that will change if, say, Indonesia becomes the final assembly point, or Myanmar or other large, Vietnam. So that might actually change. In the long run, I think it's more likely that big ASEAN countries will run surpluses, but they first need investments.
Yeah.
Are they talking about bilateral trade deficit or overall? Bilateral doesn't really matter, right?
It doesn't.
Right. But people worry.
So Donald Trump.
I know. Hopefully he's gone.
Sent him a memo. Make it top secret.
And then got to the special place that he's home.
Yeah, I think we've had very good discussions for the whole day. And now I think I pass the floor to our director, Bert Hofman. He will give us concluding remarks.
And I'll slide into the Zoom here for the final time. We need to find another arrangement for it, but it worked reasonably well. This is a nice view. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for online, for those who are still there, for joining. That was a great pleasure, and also great to have some questions. As far as the presenters goes, I've learned a lot. Of course, first and foremost from Professor Boyer on an overall framework for understanding motivations of FDI, but I also very much like the other presentations, including the applications, the initial applications in a categorization of FDIs, and then looking at Indonesia as a case study. I think the Singapore role, we have already emphasized that the Singapore role is a very important aspect where we need to dig really deep to get the right data. But I also like the specific ones on energy and on ports, where I think we can look at a couple of these very chunky, big investment areas or sectors. Look a lot deeper, because it brings the story together really quite well. And then finally, on the influence of the more institutional arrangement, and be it trade agreements or be it special economic zones as a tool to make those foreign direct investment work. Again, I think we have a lot to dig. The RCEP is probably too new, but going back to what was in the the ACFTA, with there's too many acronyms, the ACFTA, that may actually shed some light on what we can expect from RCEP in the future. So I think we had a very rich discussion, a good comparative advantage between Singapore and France. I think we can work together very well on this in future as well. So once again, thank you all very much. Thank you for making this very long trip to Singapore. I hope you have some time to enjoy a bit more of Singapore. I know you went to Chinatown, which is a good destination. now you need to go to a food court, I think, and have some Indonesian food. Forget about the Chinese. There's also Malay food here, very important. So I hope to see you next year all in Paris, and that we make our way there, and with a lot more results from our side, hopefully as well. So thank you all very much. Merci beaucoup.